approval of the minutes from February 18th. Are there any changes or corrections to the minutes? All right, hearing none. Do we have a motion to approve?
Motion approved.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye. All right. We do have a new application for receipt and determination of significance. Application CC number 25-06 for Lynn Bossart, owner, and James Mattingly, applicant for a wetland permit to construct a 16-foot by 9-foot deck in the wetland soil as 26 South Bridge Court, Assessors Map E11, Block 150, Lot 001B, Simsbury.
So yes, this is for determination of significance for receipt. The applicant who is in the audience, in case there are any questions, the construction of a 16-foot by 9-foot deck proposed in the wetland soils. This is one of those developments that were built in 1987, that grandfathering time of the regulations. They're using 3 helical piers for the posts, and then the silt fencing is proposed as demonstrated. At the bottom left, you can see the sketch of where the deck is in relation to the addition on the home. If there's any questions for the applicant.
It's a very minimal impact from the helical piers.
Right, right.
And it's a site that was already developed in the wetlands
Yes, yes.
before the wetland laws were enacted.
Yes, I would recommend non-significant.
Not significant, or a motion of significance. All right. Does anyone like to make a motion for significance? We'll accept the application.
To be non-significant.
Yeah, I'll move this application is not significant, and then we will resolve it in the next scheduled meeting.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right. So moving on to tonight's action, we have a public hearing, application CC. This is continuation of the public hearing for application CC number 25-02 of McCain's Affiliates, applicant and owner for wetland permit to construct 52 new residential units at the existing McLean Retirement Community with associated improvements in wetland soils and upland review area at 75 Great Pond Road, Assessors Map E08, Block 147, Lot 001, Simsbury.
Yes. I have a few slides just to summarize the application again. We have our applicant here as well. So if you'll recall, McLean is a 110-acre site that is for senior assisted living. The proposal is for the construction of 52 new residential units with improvements in the regulated area. There are 2 wetland crossings that are circled to the right, which equal to approximately 0.15 acres of direct soil impacts. There has been updated materials that were provided by the applicant, by SLR. Those include an alternate revised site plan to the right. You can see the map, and then changes to the landscape plan. An NDDB map was provided. Also, a letter from the McLean staff that addressed the winter road materials management, including the salt use, dark sky lighting practices, invasive species management, stormwater management, and pest management plan. And then also an updated letter from the soil scientist. Also, we've received public comments since the 1825 public hearing. And those are listed there, including an intervenor submission. And then we'll have some more information on that.
So today we received, and it's been placed in your Dropbox, an intervenor petition. We don't get these very often, so just thought I would take at least 1 second to just remind you of what it is and what it means. So essentially, an intervenor petition is when anyone, a citizen, a corporation, an entity, files a verified pleading that alleges specific factual information related to adverse impacts on the wetlands, and often attempts to or show identification of the types of harm to the wetland, and And usually it needs to be specific and not just kind of mere concern or mere speculation. And essentially, the intervener petition may only raise issues that are within your jurisdiction as a inland wetland commission. So what does it mean? It essentially allows the intervener party status with the same procedural rights as the applicant. The commission really, I would recommend by motion, either accepts or denies the petition, either to grant the intervener status or to not grant the intervener status. Since we got it today, I would strongly recommend you accept the petition and grant the intervener status pending town attorney review. And then I would go on with the rest of your hearing this evening, hearing from the applicant first, as is traditional, and then the intervener gets the same respect and time as an applicant would get. So the intervener can perform their own presentation, submit testimony, do any of those kinds of things. So an intervener has status. Doesn't change all that much else with how you're going to run the meeting. So I would recommend, and also the applicant hasn't had time to review the intervener status petition either. I would recommend you accept the petition granting status pending town attorney review, and a motion to that effect would be appropriate.
All right. Do we have a motion to do so, to accept?
I'll motion that we accept the intervener petition pending town attorney review.
Do we have a? All right. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, good. All right.
So that's all staff has. I would head right to the.
We'll move on to
The applicant.
The applicant. Good evening.
I don't have my glasses. Speak into the microphone, sir.
Madam Chairman, members of the commission, I'm pleased to be here tonight to represent the McLean in their application. I wasn't here prior to,
Is it working? You know. There you go. Ah,
Trying. Madam Chairman, members of the commission, I'm TJ Donahue, and I'm here to represent McLean tonight in this proceeding. I wasn't here at the last meeting, but I've seen what you've done, and I know that tonight we want to do several things. We want to talk a little bit about McLean. We want to talk a little bit about Senator McLean, and then we want Tom Daly, Matt Sanford, and Mike Doherty to present some information of revisions that we've made to the plan since we were last here. Also here tonight is Lisa Clark, the president of McLean, Connor Hogan, the steward of the lands of the McLean Game Refuge, and Carlene Rea. The site, as you know, is 112 acres set out from the McLean to be a healthcare and housing use for Simsbury. In your plan of development in Simsbury, in 5 times it's listed as a institutional use. Institutional uses in Simsbury include Ethel Walker, Westminster, Master School, McLean, the Covenant Presbyterian Church, and several other churches. This application is compliant with multiple policies of the POCD and compliant with the POCD. Sections about housing, elderly housing, institutional use, the Central Policy District, utilities, commercial growth, and support and growth of expanding existing businesses. This fits squarely within all of those desires set forth in the 2024 Plan of Development. McLean is a not-for-profit, charitable, eleemosynary institution. No aspect or activity is for profit. It operates under the Board of Trustees of the George P. McLean Trust. The main McLean campus is on a 111-acre tract of property which was specifically designated and devised in his will for the charitable health services which are ongoing today and include the continuum of senior health living and residential purposes. This property, by will, was separate and distinct from the 4,115 acres of preserve and conservation land given by Senator McLean, which is both in Simsbury and Granby and is one of the largest preserves in New England. Municipal taxation, although McLean and all its functions are charitable, not for profit, the Meadow Village, as well as all the senior residences, which are not in the primary healthcare facility, pay and will pay municipal property tax levies to the town of Simsbury. In 2024, McLean paid $858,765 in taxes to the town of Simsbury. The basis and motivation of McLean. McLean seeks a measured and well-spaced, necessary elderly housing neighborhood. The town POCD indicates the need and desire for the use and services and housing they provide. The fact that it's in the central policy area with both sewer and water means that there are very few other places where it can go or where it can expand. The state of Connecticut and its legislature have studies that show critical need for more housing, all types, especially seniors. McLean's research, governance, and Senator McLean's vision leads directly to continued, measured, and careful development. It is obvious that the good neighbor's motivation is to stop development of a private land as it's entitled to be used under Simsbury zoning and state and municipal law. McLean is surrounded by very good neighbors and in very good neighborhoods. And these folks live in their gracious homes with grace and respect for their neighbors and neighborhood. But they all concede, all they want to do is see nothing in that meadow. In most circumstances, neighbors are faced with traffic and infrastructure burdens. Not here. This is a site that is growing on its own land, and there will be no new traffic in their neighborhoods. And the application includes mitigation and protection measures, which will be reviewed in detail here and as a function of site plan approval. While a multi-story apartment building was considered for this site in this meadow at McLean, the McLean chose what is before you to be of a scale and massing to be compatible to the extended neighborhood and to be a considerate neighbor. Now, my slides. That's a picture of George P. McLean. McLean was a Connecticut governor, United States Senator, and Simsbury's greatest modern benefactor. He died in 1932, and his trust purposes were many, but the two primary benefits were for the McLean Health Center, which is on the 112 acres, and the 4,000-acre McLean Game Refuge. He was a big deal. He was a big deal nationally in every way. In the 20th century, Presidents Coolidge, Hoover, Roosevelt, and Taft came to Simsbury to visit Senator McLean. This photo is of Coolidge, and that in his right hand is a fishing rod. The grave of George P. McLean is in Simsbury Center, Simsbury, right up on the top of Plank Hill Road. The McLean Health Center, a not-for-profit facility providing a continuum of care to the Simsbury's adult community and beyond, as well as implement outreach health service to adults and the McLean Game Refuge. These are the lasting legacies of an incredible benefactor. The timeline that we use is Senator McLean's will establish the Game Refuge and create an endowment which grew to be the McLean Health Center. It was a very enlightened estate plan. He left money which was to be husbanded and invested by the trustees with the express direction that when the time came and the funds had grown enough, they would build this fantastic facility for Simsbury. In 1971, McLean opened as a not-for-profit dedicated to serving others. 1979, we expanded, and again in 98 and 2022, and right now we're looking at another expansion. This is a map a page from your plan of conservation development, and you can see the light blues there. This one. This is the piece we're looking at. And if you draw an X through Simsbury, it goes right through McLean. This is a map that shows the surrounding lands at Simsbury, and it shows the Meadow Homes project as a very small portion of the 112-acre campus. It's shown again here. And on this map, we show the McLean Game Refuge to the north, which is a very, very significant and beautiful place. And this, again, is the McLean Game Refuge. People talked about certain aspects of McLean as a steward of the lands. There is no second place in terms of stewardship of proper lands in Simsbury than McLean. This is the building from a higher view. This is an area, the assisted living in the campus, in the central campus area. Clearly, you can see from those views that the Meadow neighborhood is going to be a very, very less intense use than any of the rest of the campus. McLean campus is handicap accessible throughout, has a continuum of care and services, common management, integration of McLean services for residents, step-up services, and partner support strategies. This is a list I won't go through, but it's McLean Health Center, the Independent Living Seniors Can Plan and Thrive, McLean Game Refuge, McLean Health Center, short-term rehab, home care, hospice, outpatient physical therapy, assisted living, memory care, and long-term care. And the out services are Meals on Wheels, caregiver support groups, community cafe, adult day care, and Boundless. This is a list of the services from 2024. 2,500 clients were served. The health center has 89 nursing beds serving 337 clients, 45% Medicaid subsidized, 192 were post-acute care, which is the step down. Assisted living serving 85 residents with subsidies for many, 10 cottages and 103 apartments, and 13 villas and 143 clients served. Home care and hospice, 824 clients served. Adult daycare, and we get a lot of very fine compliments on our hospice. It's a very special group. Adult daycare, 30 clients served. Meals on Wheels, 10,000. Outpatient physical therapy, 6,669. Driving assessments and other programs and services. And there's also entertainment in our facilities that we make available to the general public. This is another slide which shows in the yellow area, what we're talking about is the area for this activity. McLean is a major Simsbury employer. It's in the top 3. We have 452 active employees, including 300 full-time staff. The environmental favored design features of this proposed project is ultra-efficient exterior envelopes of the houses, reduced all-electric heating and cooling systems, results in 75% reduction in utility costs, investment of solar panels offsets remaining electrical needs. Water-efficient low-flow plumbing fixtures, electrical vehicle-ready, Energy Star appliances, and environmentally friendly interior and exterior materials. This is a figure which talks about the biodiversity map, which Tom Daly will speak to later, but it shows clearly that there's no major affected or impact areas anywhere near us. Again, another map of the area. Every year we give an annual report on community impact. The community impacts are kind of what I went through before, but it's available to any of you who have any interest in the McLean. And this is a statement that is part of the thing that shows some of the amounts of impact we've had. So we're fulfilling the legacy. We're going back, and here we're coming to complement it, to continue to grow. It's a growing and changing population. The peer facilities, McLean, Doncaster, Seabury, Macaulay, and others are somewhat peers, but they're all full and they're all expanding to meet certain needs. Population growth, we don't have to tell anybody, but when McLean was here, there were 3,600 people in town. Now there are 24,000. And at 31, there were 10% over 55, and now they're at 32%. Our services are very much needed. This is the plan of conservation and development, which shows you a couple things. It shows you the central policy area, the red line, which is where the only place you could get these places sited with adequate utilities. And the assessor designation of the property is commercial. The designation of the plan of conservation is institutional, and the underlying zone is residential. Thank you. I'm going to have Tom Daly come up and go through changes that they've made to the plan for you. You guys know how to use these things?
Yeah.
Good, here you go.
Let me just put this.
I'll take that. That's the pointer.
Good evening, Commission. For the record, my name is Tom Daly. I am a professional engineer with SLR Consulting. As you recall, we gave a lengthy and a robust presentation to this commission. Since then, we've received some comments from the commission, from the neighbors, and then actually throughout the process. So we're here this evening to build upon the presentation that we gave you last time. TJ and actually Brittany did a little bit of this in the beginning. So one of the questions that the neighbors asked was, has road construction been started on site? And no road construction has been started. The equipment on site was for a geotechnical study. That's a normal process as part of any construction site to go out there, do borings, understand the soil constraints. So the equipment was track mounted, but there has been no road construction or any construction method started on site. That would be inappropriate, and we really can't do that until we get all our approvals. Streetlights, the proposed streetlights are similar to what you've seen out there on campus that they retrofitted a few years ago. They will be 3,000 K. They come in 3,000 and 4,000. We talked to a lighting expert, and we can go with the 3,000. They will be on timers, and they will be dark sky compliant lights. There was a question about earthwork, and what that, I think one of the neighbors asked about earthwork. The intent of this plan is to be a balanced site. Cut to fill. There's no expectation to bring in large amounts of general fill. We'll bring in normal construction materials, stone, concrete, and bituminous. But in fact, it's been designed in a very thoughtful way to be a balanced site. Makes sense for many, many reasons. You've received a documentation from McLean where they provided guidance on a few things. One, de-icing and snow removal. We worked with McLean. Actually, I gave them a copy of the DEP stormwater manual, has a de-icing or snow management, and the response was, where are we doing that? So you have a letter in your packet that where McLean confirms that in fact they follow all those best management practices associated with de-icing and snow management. In addition to that, they also have a landscape maintenance plan. So I don't know if any of you were on the commission back in the late 90s when we came forward with the villas. But at that time, we prepared a integrated pest management plan and a landscape management plan. Those were submitted on the record, and McLean has been following those since then. So we actually resubmitted those back to you, but those have been part of the McLean process since then. And in addition to that, there was some discussion about that we're smarter. We know about the plants, and there's some historic landscaping out there that maybe are not plants we would plant today. McLean is committed to taking a look at their overall campus, and as they tackle projects or get into that areas, they're willing to kind of pull out those old plants and then put in native species to replace those non-native species. So. But those three topics are all covered in a letter from Lisa Clark to this commission making those commitments. There was also, obviously, this site is located in a landscape where there is a adjacent watershed of significant size. So to the rear of the property, actually, the Hop Brook is a significant watershed throughout the campus or throughout the town. As you can see, it's about 3,200 acres. By the time it gets to us, it's a significant watershed. And but to give you the context, is the little white dot in the corner is what McLean makes up of that overall watershed. We make up only 2% of that watershed, and actually out of those 60 acres, much of that land is not being developed. So we're trying to give you the context. This was a slide we provided to you before. There has been some testimony and put on the record about the changing in flows in the stream in terms of flooding and lower flows. I would say yes, it's in a mapped floodplain, and you're going to see seasonally those streams have fluctuations. During the summer, they're a low flow. During the spring, this time you're expected to get some flooding. That's not a surprise to us. And it's very typical. Actually, it's very typical for any stream to see those fluctuations. But to give you a context of how we fall in that overall watershed landscape, we're a very, very small part of that. And then this is a graphic, once again, that presenting. So you see the McLean site here. This is the Hop Hollow neighborhood. And this is Hop Brook falling down through here and heading to the south. This is a mapped floodplain and a floodway. This is the overlay of the FEMA map. The floodplain barely comes onto the McLean property, but so the testimony that the neighbors have provided is absolutely appropriate. It's in the floodplain. It's in the floodplain. Those are expected characteristics of a stream, of a watershed with 3,200 acres. But a part of our submission package is we did detailed calculations in terms of what that impact would be on the downstream impact properties. And our analysis was done in accordance with your town regulations, where we looked at the peak runoff rate for the 2 through the 100-year storm event. And what you see listed is under existing conditions, what the flow to Hop Brook is, and under proposed conditions, what we're proposing. And those changes are made through the stormwater management system on site. As you know, we have 2 stormwater basins. One is made up of 2 cells. One is made up of 1 cell. But we're showing a net decrease for all the flows. That being said, if you put in the context of 3,200 acre watershed, it's frankly not going to make a plus or minus because it's such a small element. I would say we have worked through 2 rounds of your town engineering comments, and at this time there is no outstanding comments related to drainage in terms of their peer review of our drainage analysis. This was a presentation slide I gave last time, and I think there was some confusion by the neighbors of what this was trying to represent. The blue areas are flow patterns. It was not intended to represent the topographic constraints as a whole. I think there was some question I absolutely agree that if you're standing on Hop Hollow here, the McLean property does rise up above. But what there is there's a low point in between. What does happen? Water can't go uphill. So the intent of this slide was, so from a viewshed, this is not a viewshed analysis. This is a watershed pattern. And this is to show that a small portion of Hop Hollow actually flows into the meadow. Most of Hop Hollow actually flows directly back to Hop Brook. But if you look at the elevations here, we have 284, 280, 278, and then it rises up higher here. We have 282, 278. This is the water pattern that we're going here. So the intent of this slide was not to be a viewshed analysis or give overall. It was to present the fact that no water from the development can have the ability to get to Hop Hollow because we have a low point in between. And by we are staying out of this portion of the meadow, and this is to show that in fact that we're not intersecting that low point and that natural drainage pattern that goes on this plan. So on this plan is north is to left, so left to right. So once again, this is simply to show this is the watershed divide. This portion of Hop Hollow is flowing onto the McLean site, and there's no portion of the McLean site that's flowing onto the Hop Hollow neighborhood. This was a part of our presentation because we knew these neighbors would be concerned and interested in terms of understanding the overall drainage analysis. In addition, so part of our drainage analysis, we delineate proposed and existing watersheds. Once again, So you can see here's the wetland corridor in question. The water's flowing down in this direction. There's a high point between a portion of the hop hollow. This water drains down. We absolutely agree there's a small portion of this watershed 42 that flows towards Hop Hollow. But we have basically grabbed all the development portion of the property and sent it down to the stormwater basin. Only a tiny portion of the land goes to Country Club Drive, and most of that, 90% of that watershed is remaining untouched as it naturally occurs. Even with that, we are showing a net decrease in discharge or peak runoff rate to the Country Club Drive watershed. These are the same slides that we presented to you last time. But all we're trying to show here is that we have been very conscientious since day one to understand not just Hop Brook, but then these smaller watersheds of our neighbors and making sure that we are being respectful and we're meeting the town standards. So in part of our drainage analysis, we included multiple drainage analysis points, not just the final one downstream. It's because we knew these neighborhoods would be interested in those outcomes. Not to mention, we knew your town engineering department would be very interested in making sure that we were not having any negative impacts towards those neighbors. Another comment that was raised by the commission and your town engineering staff is a phasing plan. So with this plan, we are committed to, McLean is committed to build the project in two phases. And we expect there to be smaller sub-phases in this. I think we explained to the commission, once mass earthwork is done, those areas can be sprayed with a hydro seed or a bonded fiber matrix, which would provide temporary stabilization. So we can be actively working in here. We are including the 2 wetland crossings in phase 1 because we want the ability to build those during the best season. And so by building those during the driest season, we have the best ability to do that. So I'm not saying those would be built at one. Typically, we would do is wait for the driest period of the season, and then we would put those culverts in. But we have committed to building the project, and the project would also be cleared in 2 phases. TJ presented this slide. There was some discussion last time about wildlife corridors and the POCD. And this is just a representation of, these are slides from your POCD. So you have in the POCD, there's discussion of wildlife or east-west connections. Obviously, we know there's really some strong also north-south connectors. This is the Basalt Ridge here in Talcott, and then we have this other ridge line here. In addition to that, the POC identified some 4 locations. I would note on here is the graphic here is not showing going through the McLean property. It is showing going through the neighborhood. But I also note that as part of our plan, we are providing a 100-foot buffer to the neighbors. So we are strengthening that portion of it. But this is a copy that's in your POCD. In addition to that, there is a report that was prepared called the Farmington Valley Biodiversity Project, and it looked at all the Farmington Valley towns. In addition, in that there was a Simsbury section, so there's 2 maps that of importance there. One, this is a map that talked about primary conservation areas, secondary conservation areas, and interconnected area connections. And I just note that this area of McLean is not identified in any of those 3 categories. In addition to that, they also prepared a graphic that talked about basically biodiversity hotspots, and not to be surprised, right? The Talcott Ridge is a and then you have once again that ridge line. In this area here, you have large open space, and I believe Ethel Walker is here, so that's a strong, east-west corridor. And then up here we have McLean Game Refuge, which once again is a strong east-west corridor. So here we are referencing here that we're kind of, I guess we're saying is the middle of the donut. This area was not identified as as a critical area in under either one of these maps. With that, I'm going to ask Matt Sanford is going to come up, and then I'll be up back in a minute.
Good evening. For the record, it's Matthew Sanford, professional wetland scientist, registered soil scientist with SLR. I'm actually filling in for Megan Raymond, my associate, who's also a professional wetland scientist and registered soil scientist. She could not be here this evening. I'm quite familiar with the site, having delineated the wetlands on the site back in, I want to say 2009, 2010. Myself as a registered soil scientist, as well as another registered soil scientist, William Root. So SLR is quite familiar with the site, including myself. What I wanted to do now was make sure we bring the focus back to what we're here for this evening, and that is the actual wetland activities. And so I wanted to go through the wetland crossings that are proposed for this project and talk a little bit about how the two crossing locations were chosen, and talk a little bit about what those impacts result in to the functions and values of the wetland. The map before you shows the two locations, number 1 and number 2. We are proposing two crossings within one wetland corridor. If you've read the reports that have been provided to the commission, this wetland is referenced as wetland number 8. Wetland crossing number 1. So this is a photo of wetland crossing number 1. This is the wetland area that you see in the foreground. This was actually taken about a week ago, right after a large rain event. I think most of the state got anywhere from around 1 inch to 1.5 inches, and this was taken right after that rain event. There's not much evidence of any flow in this particular wetland. This wetland, we would call it having ephemeral surface flow at times, primarily attributed to stormwater runoff from the adjacent uplands on either side of it. The wetland itself, and the reason why it is a wetland, is that it does have a high groundwater table throughout the year. And that high groundwater table then allows the formation of what we call as hydric soils, poorly drained soils. So in most cases, this wetland doesn't have a lot of surface water moving through it, primarily during storm events only. And I think that's important to note in this particular case. As you can see, this has a dense high overstory, very little mid-story or understory, and that's a result of the high overstory, the dense overstory you have, so there's not a lot of light that penetrates down into the mid-story and or understory of the system. You notice the lack of shrubs, and given the time of year, you don't see a lot of dieback of any perennial vegetation in this wetland system as well. So just note that.
Quick question.
Sure.
Towards the golf course.
Yeah, so the golf. So
South.
no, yeah, south. Yep.
Okay.
And is that standing water down at the bottom?
There is a little evidence of standing water, about 1 inch in depth, and again, that's right after a rain event. This is wetland crossing number 2, so this is the downstream or down gradient wetland. Apologize for the sunlight in the picture, but this is showing again the wetland area. I think it's important to take note in this particular area that our canopy changes a little. And you'll also notice in the photo that this is an old farm road or trail road in this location, probably created 100 years ago. Here you start to see a little more shrubbery along the edge of the forest here. And you'll notice that there's some small amounts of standing water, not flowing water, but standing water. Again, about an inch in depth. The soils underneath this farm road are hydric again, and therefore were flagged as a wetland. So I wanted to take the time to talk a little bit about how we go about establishing crossings within wetlands or watercourses. So as a team, we sit down after we've identified the resources on a site with the engineers, and we look at the various features on the site, and we look at the wetlands themselves in terms of the type of wetland that it is, the functions and values that wetland may provide. And we also look at the topography of the site, the widths of the wetlands, to make a determination as to where the best locations would be to cross the resource area. So when you look at the proposed plan, you'll notice that the crossings take advantage of narrower areas. I will caveat, though, that it's not always the best place to cross the wetland in the narrowest spot. In some cases, narrow means steeper slopes where water has more concentration. And we tend to look at crossings to be in areas that are more level or flatter in topography. And so that's one of the criteria we look at when establishing a crossing location. In addition to that, we talk about the functions and values of the actual feature itself. If you had a chance to read our wetland report, you will notice in our functions and values evaluation for wetland number 8, the principal functions of this wetland were threefold. 1, groundwater discharge. 2, nutrient transformation. And 3, sediment retention. And what's important about that is when we're doing crossings, we want to make sure that we maintain those functions across the wetland in the future. In addition, we also look at hydraulic and hydrologic conditions within the wetland and the sizing and the computing of the correct size for the crossing itself. I will tell you that the watershed to both of these crossings is relatively small in nature. And I would also say that most civil engineers that would come before this commission with a plan would propose a crossing of much narrower diameter. In fact, given the hydrology in the watershed, a civil engineer can come in here today and probably propose an 18-inch reinforced concrete pipe, smooth line corrugated plastic pipe, corrugated metal pipe, etc. The proposal that is before this commission this evening has a 6-foot wide by 3-foot deep culvert crossing, well exceeding the hydraulic and or hydrologic needs to provide through flow through this wetland and to maintain the functions and values of this wetland. It's highly unusual to have crossings of that size given the contributing watershed at these locations. One of the reasons that we provided such a large crossing is to promote small wildlife crossing under the road. And that could be either wetland dependent species. And I caveat wetland dependent species in that we don't have any wetland dependent wildlife species habitat on this particular site. That would include perennial watercourses that would support fish, turtles, and other species, vernal pools, and such. I would also say that the crossings could provide certainly upland habitat potential for small mammals, small birds, reptiles, or amphibians. And so we laid out those crossings in accordance to provide an opportunity to still maintain that function through the wetland system. We've also provided a natural substrate on the bottom of the culvert. Again, these is an ephemeral wetland system, ephemeral surface water system here. Those culvert crossings are going to see very little water, primarily during a storm event. I believe we've gone above and beyond in terms of providing a large crossing for this particular area of wetland. And lastly, in terms of the crossings, and I'll get into mitigation in a minute, and I think it's important for the commission to understand is that we've maintained the functions and values of the wetland. And as the commission, it's your responsibility to evaluate the proposed project on those functions and values of the wetland. Are they maintained long-term? And the answer for these two crossings is yes. In addition, we've also looked at the crossings and have reduced the impacts associated with the crossings. I believe the crossings were in excess, when you combined the impacts associated with the clearing and grading, were in excess of 5,000 square feet. We had our engineers look at the grading in and around those two crossings and the tree clearing associated with installing the two crossings, and we reduced those clearing and grading activities. The combined impact for the two crossings now is roughly 3,200 square feet. So there's a net reduction now based on our revision to both the clearing and grading. The proposal also included wetland enhancement and restoration plantings. That equated to both on the upstream and downstream side of each crossing. We were proposing a large assemblage of native plants, both trees, shrubs, and perennials. We have not changed the amount of wetland restoration or creation, or I should say wetland restoration or enhancement that would be provided by this proposal. So I believe there was 17,000 plus square feet of restoration and enhancement, roughly, if you do the numbers, roughly 5 times the impact on this proposal. We would, and that equates to about 0.440 acres for those that want to convert to acres. We would interplant, because we've reduced the grading and we've reduced the clearing, we would interplant and underplant some of the species along the edges of the wooded areas to remain. And then those cleared areas associated on both down gradient and up gradient sides of the culvert, where there is a little more sunlight, you see the species that are on your plan. These species would do a couple things. First of all, they actually increase the biodiversity of the wetland system. We talked a little bit about the lack of understory, the lack of midstory in the wetland. This planting plan provides an enhancement to that condition. Secondly, we talked a little bit about the functions and value of nutrient removal that's performed by these wetlands. Currently, that function is provided by the tree roots that are within the wetlands. Adding additional shrubby vegetation as well as perennial vegetation actually increases that, enhances that function and value, even more so than under current conditions. So with that being said, it's my professional opinion as a professional wetland scientist that the crossings that I propose before you will not adversely impact those principal functions and values of the wetlands in Wetland 8 on this particular site. And I'm going to turn it over to Tom.
Thank you, Matt. Once again, for the record, Tom Daly. So as part of our resubmission, well, we presented to this commission, we heard your comments, and we went back to the drawing board. And what we did was we took a look at the overall layout of the plan, and while we were clustering the units, how could we cluster them more, further cluster them? And ultimately, we took a look and worked closely with McLean and their architects. What was our building-to-building separation? Could we reduce that? Could we pull everything in slightly? And I'm happy to say that we were able to do that. So we were able to basically, it's a cluster development, but we able to compress that. And the ultimate, so this graphic is representing the blue is representing the new locations. And to bring some of these units to your attention, give you an example. So this is our wetland corridor that Matt was just presenting to. You can see in black is where the submitted unit was, and now we've moved it significantly away from the wetland. You're also seeing these new green areas here, and that's additional tree clearing or tree preservation. So about 2.5 acres of additional trees are no longer going to be cleared. Another area of interest is we had this area here, and I think it was the chair, one of the last questions you asked, how many buildings do you have in the upland review area? With this revised plans, the answer is 0. So what we did was, you can see, we actually, we're also trying to reinforce the buffer and the landscape area along Country Club. So we actually compressed it on both ends, on the 2 bookends. So you can see here is where, in black is where the unit used to be. We actually flip-flopped the unit, mirrored it, and moved it completely out of the upland review area. In this area here, we actually had 3 units, which were resulting in the unit encroaching into 2 areas. One, it was closer to the neighbor here, and it was doing some clearing here, and also it was in the upland review area. What we did was we reduced that to 2 units, compressed the units in the middle, and moved the unit to the middle. Even this unit, which was basically right at the 100-foot upland review area, we mirrored the unit and moved that away even farther away. So this unit, which was about half, this building was about half in the upland review area, it's completely out now. This was another unit, just by sliding it over, it was already outside the upland review area, but by sliding that over, we're able to create more and retain more woods adjacent to the wetlands. This unit here, we actually turned 90 degrees, brought the building out of it. So just by a simple rotation, to be honest with you, it's most of these units were set up for the best solar orientation. Very, very detailed analysis was done to get the buildings with the solar orientation. But at that point, we rotated this to get this out of the upland review. Once again, here's another unit that we mirrored the unit, basically flip-flopped it, and pulled it out of the upland review area. So what was the result of that? This is a list of the units and their proximity to the wetlands. So unit 5-6 was at 68 feet. We've now increased that to 100 feet. Building 7-8 was at 75 feet. We've doubled that. We're at almost 146 feet. Building 21-22 was at 44 feet. It's now at 108 feet. Building 29-30 was at 100. It's now at 134. 31 and 32 was at 100. We've moved that an additional 30 feet away from the wetlands. 35, 36, and just remember, these are duplex units, so it's a double unit, but it's a single building. We're at 120 feet. We moved that to 144. So even if we were outside the upland review area, we still took a greater look at that to move that farther away. 41, 42 was at 98. We've increased that to 104. 43, 44, we're at 70 feet. We went to 102. 51 and 52, which was this unit here. That was the unit that was one of the closest ones to the wetland. We've increased that to 108 feet. And by some creative rotation of units, and then I think the other unit 21 was this unit here, was the second closest. Once again, 44 brought it out to 108 feet. So what's the result of that? It really resulted in 3 things. One, it reduced the activities within the upland review area by 28%. We reduced that by 1.4 acres. We reduced the impervious area within the upland review area by 25%, to the point where the impervious is simply just associated with the roadway network. And ultimately, as I said, these green areas, which are adjacent to the wetlands and adjacent to the Country Club Drive neighborhood, we reduced the overall clearing by 2.4 acres. And then Mike will talk about, there's also an additional reduction of lawn associated with that. And one item I would bring to the attention, so just to give you a reference, this portion of the meadow here is not being touched, and that's approximately 5 acres of the meadow, which is not going to be changed, except, well, today, actually, there's already a mowed path through here, and I think I explained to the commission, this is not a paved walking path, this is just a mowed path to get around the meadow. So we're gonna mimic that, but this whole area of the meadow, 5 acres, is not being touched. With that, I'm going to ask Mike Doherty to come up to speak to the landscaping. Thank you.
For the record, Mike Doherty, a licensed landscape architect in the state of Connecticut for SLR Consulting. So I really want to just briefly go through a couple of items that came up during the last meeting. We went through a fairly robust overview of our landscape approach. So tonight, I just wanted to briefly touch on the lawn areas, which were a topic of discussion, the establishment of a layered landscape, which we touched on last time, and the creation of naturalized landscape zones and transition areas within the campus that we're proposing here tonight. This graphic in front of you was on the screen last time. You may have had trouble seeing it as it was a bit far away, but what we basically are showing here is a typical landscape of, tree plantings with lawn, and next to that juxtapositioning is what we are set to achieve in this project, which is a much more layered landscape, a much more diverse landscape, and really the preferred landscape for McLean, as you heard over their years of stewardship for the land itself in Simsbury and elsewhere. So in terms of lawn area, we went and looked at the current plan that was submitted originally. This is not the revised plan that Tom had just went through. So in the current plan that was submitted in the original package, we went through the landscape plan and identified areas in green here throughout the campus space of the Meadow Homes where we could increase the layered planting landscape bed areas and decrease the lawn area itself. So under this plan, we can decrease lawn areas just over 1 acre. That creates a landscape for this project that is 3/4 planted with species other than lawn. That is not typical of a development project in most any state. The lawn areas will be low and no mow species. And if the revised plan that was submitted currently for this meeting with the blue shifted buildings that Tom just went through, we can further reduce the lawn area with the changes that are proposed under that plan. So even under the original plan, we are significantly reducing and keeping the lawn areas at a very minimal, where they basically just surround the foundation of the buildings themselves. We looked at a number of adjacent properties and other proposals and other projects within the town of Simsbury that have been developed in recent years, including ones that were in the open space cluster zone for the town. And we did an analysis of what was built in those properties. What we found was they range from, on average, a ½ acre to about 0.33 acres of lawn per unit. What we're proposing here is 0.07 acres of lawn per unit. Again, not typical of a development of any size such as this. So, to touch really briefly, we are really looking to establish a different type of landscape for this property. There are resources on the land which are high quality and things that we want to highlight. But not everything, as we discussed last meeting, is of the highest quality. So we are, again, looking to create this rich landscape mosaic, and it's through a variety of strategies. But one of the key ones is planting a mix of species type, a mix of sizes, and a mix of methods. So everything from seeding to plugs to 1 gallon pots to 6 and 3 gallon pots to trees of various calipers and whips. And what that allows us to do is create this layered structure. And this is just kind of a graphic representation of the types of plants that would be achieved in say, a meadow situation. And I'll touch on a couple other types of environments as well. But basically, you have 4 main layers. The structural are the more larger and deep-rooted plants. Those are the trees and shrubs, all the way to the taller meadow grasses, such as big blue stem and Panicum virgatum. You have the seasonal plants, which are kind of typically the pops of color. They flower, they fruit, they provide pollination attractions. They're kind of the most attractive, I would say, in terms of the planting. The ground cover is the workhorse of the group. These are the mat forming, the spreading plants. You're not always going to see them. This time of year, they're the first ones you'd start to see pop out of the ground and green up again, such as carex, sedges, ferns, things of that nature. And then you also have the filler plants. And these can be short-lived or long-lived, biennials or perennials. These are large seed-producing plants that can kind of self-disseminate themselves and fill in gaps. The reason we're doing this and looking to achieve this is many times fold over. The biodiversity aspect of it, the obviously attractiveness of it, the naturalistic aesthetic that fits the campus, but mostly it's to really heal back the land. We understand construction is a process that disturbs the land. By allowing us to come in and work at these various levels, it allows us to heal that land faster and actually can achieve a landscape of greater significance. So we talked a little bit about meadow species, but what we really are going to achieve is a variety of layered landscape habitats and zones. So we're going to be looking at everything from, the open no-mow, low-mow grass, to the meadow species, to the shrubland and thicket, up to the wooded edge that's there today, as well as Matt noted in the wetland crossings, planting within trees that are going to be preserved in areas that aren't actually disturbed by the construction, but are areas that are good for additional habitat to be created. Within this range, in between each of these types of habitat zones, we'll also create transitional spaces. And these are key for the movement of wildlife, for the creation of a true habitat zone, because there's a lot of species that live in those interstitial spaces as well. So you won't see a defined edge between every single one of these spaces. This is going to be a blended landscape that really flows and creates and works with nature. We're working with the game refuge folks. We're going to work through a detailed landscape management plan as we move into construction, we hope, and really start to understand and embrace the natural processes, including a managed succession, which allows us to have these landscapes evolve over time. These aren't static things. It's a dynamic landscape. We want to achieve each of these states, but we're not going to try to hold it at one of the states all the time. And really, what this amounts to is we want the units themselves to be enveloped by the landscape. Again, we had a large rendering from the last meeting. I'm sure it was very difficult to see, so we wanted to do an enlargement of a typical area of planting and just highlight the thought and the process that's gone into this to show the commission, again, how we want the unit itself to be blended into the landscape and the landscape to heal itself around these units. We are not trying to achieve a typical suburban landscape or aesthetic here. And nor would I say that McLean's campus has ever tried to do that. You can see the number 1 in the blue dot here is an area that would be the wood line or the woodland that's going to be preserved. In front of that, we have area 2, and within that, you can see a lot of different colors, some larger areas that show trees and shrubs, and this is the areas that we would be planting in a mix. And so it's not going to be, a meadow everywhere. It's going to have pockets of other plantings within it. Some areas are going to lend themselves to mostly meadow species that are going to get more sun, but there's also going to be areas that the existing wood line is going to shade and it's going to lend itself more to, ferns and the shrubland thicket. You can see the more thinner green around the buildings with the number 4 here. That is the no-mow or low-mow grass area that we are proposing that I had showed in the previous slides. And then finally, there are going to be beds, as you would expect, up and along the foundation itself to create that aesthetic along the edge of the building and hide the foundation and create ornamental beds that the unit owners could enjoy. So to briefly wrap up the presentation that Tom, myself, and Matt have provided this evening, under this project, we are reducing the direct wetland impacts by over 2,400 square feet from the previous original submission. We've, again, maintained the wetland restoration and enhancement plan that has not diminished whatsoever. As Matt stated, that's 5 times greater than the proposed wetland impacts. All the buildings have been removed from the upland review area. We've reduced the grading and clearing limits by 2.5 acres almost. Of that, a total of 1.5 were removed from the upland review area. We've reduced the lawn area by slightly over 1 acre. And overall, we're programming this project as a progressive landscape approach to all implementation, establishment, and management, again, in the light of McLean and its stewardship goals. And they've really drove the bus to get us to this state today and really pushed our team to make sure that we're doing things that are healing the land, adding to the existing resources that are there, and adding to the campus that they've achieved to date. Thank you.
Right. So, now being,
So as typical, you certainly, as a commissioner, welcome to ask the applicant any questions, or you can move along. It's your call.
there are some questions that I would like to ask.
So I'd suggest maybe the applicant team get up to the microphone to keep it moving.
Yes, I was, especially about the latter presentation, because I know I asked a lot about questions about that last time. I like the inclusion of the meadow species. I was just wondering are those areas going to be mowed at some point? Is there a landscape plan for mowing? Will there be the lawn maintenance? Will it be, best management practices, IPM, no fertilizing? Do you have a planting plan? A plant list, possible list, and
Sure.
Are you looking for cultivars or nativars or straight species, those sorts of things?
Okay, thank you. Once again, Mike Doherty, a landscape architect for SLR. I'll try to remember each of those. So everything will be mown at some point. So typically it's going to evolve over time. So when it's first planted, say the meadow areas, we're going to have to keep an eye on them. And we typically will keep mowing those up to 4 times in a year, depending on the growth. And the reason for that is you mow them high, and it keeps the weeds down, and it allows the actual seeds that we want to germinate to really strengthen and get a hold. If we mow it much lower than that, then you're scalping all the plants, and eventually the weed species will be able to overtake the plants that we want. So that will diminish. And then typically what we would have is a 1 to 2 year mowing regime depending on what we've got established and what those plants really respond to. So on a good meadow, if you can only mow it once a year, that's fantastic. But it typically, in our experience, it usually arrives at 2 times. So again, it's going to be a piece that's going to have to get monitored. So we have done plans, management plans, and they lay out the steps to identify the species that are growing and how to monitor those and then achieve the results that you need to by either mowing or not mowing. So it really is an evolution that you have to take as it goes.
Granted.
It's not a one-size-fits-all
No.
model that we can.
And then sometimes
Yeah.
you don't want to mow in the spring.
Right.
You want to mow, or don't want to mow in the fall, you want to mow in the spring.
Exactly, yeah.
all right.
So depending again on the species that
That's-
are growing, certain insects will overwinter, they'll lay their eggs, they'll have other benefits at different times of the year, so.
Yeah. I like the fact that you're going with a different approach to the landscaping. One of the questions was nativars or cultivars or straight species.
So right now, there is a list of plants in the documents.
Okay.
We don't shy away from nativars if they're,
Available.
proven, and we know there's no issue with them escaping or creating any other problems. We will use them. We try to use the straight species as much as we can, and sometimes that's not always possible with certain plant types,
Yeah.
but for the most part, we lend ourselves towards using just straight species.
And is this approach that McLean's is looking to use on the rest of their campus?
So we use this approach in the rear of the Goodrich on the area that we modified for the golf course and created a stormwater basin. There's a fantastic array of plants that have been put in there. And again, we used everything from plugs and whips and seed and larger plants. And it's been successful. That's the mowing regime has a little bit tricky because the slopes in and around the basin are a little steeper in some areas, but that's where we've started this approach.
Yeah, it would be a lovely model for the other, I know you mentioned other projects.
Yep.
They don't always come before conservation, so we don't get a look in for those things. But it'd be
Right.
nice to have a good model in the town to show what can be done other than the conventional
For sure.
law, for even the neighbors. Tree thinning, last time you mentioned tree thinning, is that still on the?
So that's again a management, it would be more of a deferred, it wouldn't necessarily have to happen under this project.
Yeah.
It's just a thought that we had, as you had heard, the thin understory. We think there's opportunities in certain areas to thin out either some dead wood or some trees that maybe aren't doing as well to allow light into areas that we can start to get an understory growing
Yeah.
to increase that biodiversity.
I would recommend not. I mean, nature will take care of those trees, and those old dead trees are great resources for the wildlife. So
For sure, yeah.
Just something to throw in.
Yep, and we're all for, keeping standing dead wood and using
Yeah.
coarse woody debris too.
Yeah.
Yep.
Let's see. Sue, do you have a?
Yes, I just wanted to interject here that one of the photos that was shown, I think of location 1 for the water crossing, was noted as being a location with a lot of high cover and nothing in the understory. It was actually full of hemlock, which is very susceptible to the woolly adelgid and is already present in Simsbury. So likely a lot of those trees are going to die. So I wouldn't try and clear those trees because they're inevitably going to die. But I did have a question also. Gosh, let me see if I can remember. With regards to the statement about dramatically increasing the biodiversity, do you have any kind of a floral inventory that shows where the starting point is for you? And, what, I'm sorry, I missed the part where there's a list of plants that you're going to be putting in.
Sure.
But I do appreciate the plan and the layered landscaping, so I'm interested to know where your starting point is to be able to state that the biodiversity is going to be dramatically increased.
Sure. So if I did say dramatically, I was mostly talking about in the enhancement area for the wetlands, because currently, right now, as you could see, or if you've been on the site, it is mostly tree and some shrub layer in a thin area at the second crossing. And so are going to be planting, everything from forbs, ground covers, perennials, shrubs, and trees in those areas. So there's going to be a tremendous amount of a density in that planting area that isn't there currently. We have not done a full floristic study of the site, but we can pretty quickly gauge this number of species that are out there in terms of the trees because it is so predominantly treed. But as we work through and we continue to evolve the landscape plan, and the plan that's submitted originally has a plant list that you could review, we continue to kind of revisit the site and get those additional details moving along. But we haven't to date.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question. Do you know approximately, they're talking about the wetlands, how it absorbs nutrients and whatnot. Do you know approximately how much water and nutrients are absorbed by the vegetation that's there now, especially the trees? And how much will be absorbed by the new vegetation? There's got to be a delta.
Matt, you want to?
For the record, it's Matt Sanford, professional wetland scientist. We have not performed any direct calculations at this point related to that particular matter. But I will say that if you think about it, if you increase the amount of vegetation in the understory, in the midstory, and already have an existing overstory, the root complexity is going to increase considerably at those locations. So that allows for more absorption of any nutrients that may be coming down the watershed. But I don't have any exact calculations for you this evening.
And how big is the existing meadow right now? I know what's left is going to be 5, but
I think it's like 9.7.
right now.
It's slightly below 10.
And that was Mike Doherty for the record.
I was just surprised to see you put in hay-scented fern. I think I might submit some questions or some suggestions for additional plantings that might be worthwhile. But that one just takes over. So, all right.
Sometimes we want that.
Sometimes, but there are other ferns. Any other questions from the commissioners?
I noticed that you guys reduced the clearing of the trees by almost 2.5 acres. How much will be cleared at this point?
That'll be 16, and I don't know the exact, but it's about, I think it was 19.3 before, so I think it's about 16, maybe even.
Okay.
Okay. Any other? Sue?
I just have one more question, and I'm not exactly sure who to direct it to. And again, has to do with biodiversity and impact. Somebody earlier had mentioned that there would be no impact to wildlife, and I know we looked at the POCD map that showed the line that just barely grazes the area, but how are we certain that this isn't going to impact any of the wildlife that's there? I know that McLean Game Refuge is specifically reserved to preserve and protect the land and the resources for our wildlife. How is that going to be reflected in this plan?
So for the record, it's Matt Sanford again from SLR. The statement that I made was specific to wetland-dependent wildlife on this particular application. Again, that is what the commission hat is for a wetlands application, is to be looking at wetland-dependent wildlife. And I said that there wouldn't be an impact to those species associated with the project. I would further say that in terms of migration of upland wildlife, that'll still occur on this site as it does today, as it did for the houses that are around the McLean site, as it does through the golf course. Those upland wildlife species will continue to migrate and move through the corridor as they so choose. We don't always dictate where they're going to move, but they will certainly be able to move through the corridor, those upland wildlife species.
And the conservation issues are still of issue to this commission, since we're a combined inland wetlands conservation commissions. There was something else.
I have some other questions. The foundation for the road and for the culverts, how deep are those gonna go?
For the record, Tom Daly. So we are designing the roads similar to a town road standard because we have to get fire trucks in there. So it's approximately 3 inches of asphalt, and it's on the plans, but off the memory, it's 3 inches of asphalt, typically about a 6-inch layer of more of a broken stone, and then 10 to 12 inches of subbase below that.
Okay, and that's for the culverts as well?
Yeah, the culverts the road's actually above the culvert because we have to have enough cover to get utilities through there. So the way it is, it's the road, there's a fill layer, and then it's the culvert below there. And on both sides, we have retaining walls to minimize the amount of fill that goes off into the wetlands. But yes, that same, essentially the town road standard would continue right through there.
Is that gonna get down to the glacial till area at all? Which is pretty impervious.
No, to be honest, we have done geotechnical studies out here, and the soils are quite good. So, if you look at the road profile, most of the road is following natural topography. I think there's one area in this area where we're doing some fill as we come down the hill, but you'll see the centerline profile really matches nicely to, and that's what we tried to do. We don't want to, we want to balance, we want to work with the land as much as we can. So yeah, we will not be, there's not big cuts and fills associated to build that road system.
I had a question about the dark sky. I'm glad to hear that you can get the 3,000 Kelvin lighting. Is there, the 2,700's even better, but I don't know if they're available.
I had heard your comment, and we actually went back to lighting expert
Yeah.
in that fixture. It's 3 and 4,
Yeah.
but the response was, yes, 3 is good because it's dark sky compliant.
Yeah.
So under that particular, I don't think they have all the selections like you and I have when we
No,
go to Home Depot with a million lights.
I know, yeah.
But it is, it was 3 or 4 were the two
Well,
options.
Definitely go with the 3 instead of the 4.
Yeah.
And you said they were on timers. Do you know how long, like what the timers would be?
I believe
timing
there's a
would be?
letter in your packet from McLean who outlined that, and it's sunrise to sunset. It's typically off. Sunset to sunrise, it's off. So they will have that. And the nice thing about these LEDs, they're really controllable.
Yes.
So, but I think that was actually more of it might have been a question from you, but also the neighbors asked some questions
Yeah.
about timers. So,
Yeah.
these responses were kind of speaking to two crowds.
Yeah.
But typically, yeah, it's, my experience is typically a couple hours after the sun goes down, they go off.
Good.
But also, you can actually, these lights, sometimes you can bring them down to a much lower level.
Yes, so
They're
reduce the
highly
intensity,
controlled.
yeah.
So sometimes you don't have to turn it off, it just comes down because you don't need that bright light. But that transition period, and then, sunrise, and it's probably more have to do with daylight savings times. So they can also change the timer based upon daylight savings.
Yeah. And then motion sensors?
They haven't, streetlights, that doesn't really
No, I'm thinking
apply.
about house lighting.
House lighting, I think that's pretty normal to have light sconces. I think TJ showed that these buildings are intended to be very highly efficient in terms of envelope, energy use. I think motion sensor on like a post light or something would be totally appropriate.
Yeah.
Currently, their street lights do not have motion sensors.
No, I was thinking more for the house lighting, like the porch lights.
Yeah, that's
like if no one's
that's
there,
pretty
you don't need them
standard.
on.
Yeah, when you walk up, it
Yeah,
turns
they
on.
turn on,
Ultimately, and the homeowners will have final control. As you know, you can even flip that switch twice and it
Yes, you
stays
can,
on.
yeah,
When I
yeah.
let the dog out, you hit it twice.
Yeah.
But I think motion sensor and those type of things on the residential are totally appropriate.
Yeah, good. Right.
And one more thing, you're talking, correct me if I'm wrong, you said the pest control plan was developed in the 90s?
Yeah. So when we
Updated, I mean, there were
it's
a lot more product available.
So the pest plan is simply this. It says, be smart. So we didn't recommend, I don't think we recommended products. It simply says, if you have it's good practice. If you have something here, don't deal with it on the whole thing. I mean, that's the thing. So the plan we put together really spoke about some Yukon studies, and it creates a framework. Ultimately, we're looking for an expert to make the final decision, but that's the plan. So as you know, the villas out towards Great Pond, they were nestled between two wetlands, and the chair at that time, I think it was addressed to that. So it's not really about product, it's about philosophy and how do you deal with it. You know, 1 pound, if 1 pound's good, 2 pounds is better. That's the old way of doing it. We're not looking to do that. Same thing, there was a stormwater management plan that mimicked basically what's on our plans. When do you clean out the catch basins? When do you clean out the basins? How do you manage those basins? How do you do that? What we were trying to show was we've been here before with this commission. This commission has been consistent over decades in terms of asking their applicants to have those elements. We did it. It's still part of their framework. And if you look at the overall campus, most of the campus is wooded. So in terms of, if you think about other healthcare campuses that we've worked on, there's lawn everywhere. There's very little lawn on the campus. Frankly, you know, there's one gathering space in front of the Goodrich. Besides that, the villas are all tucked in. Some of those units are actually tucked in the woods with no lawn. So it's not a heavy maintenance. And that's twofold. It also saves money for McLean. The money goes to, you know, providing healthcare, not lawn maintenance. So there, and this whole area will be, they contracted with one maintenance company who manages the entire property. The homeowners will not be maintaining these properties, so it's done in a very holistic approach.
One of the major maintenance things I know at McLean's is leaf blowers, which have a noise component to them.
Yes.
Will there be quieter leaf blowers just for, you know, conservation issues with wildlife?
I can't answer that, but I would say this is, speaking with McLean, is because, you know, you think about, to be honest, my neighborhood, one buddy's doing a leaf blower one day, one person, they hit it all at once.
Yeah.
So they don't, so the nice thing is, yes, they'll come in, but it's done quickly and moves out.
Okay.
The other thing is, we don't have a lot of lawn, so we don't, I mean, leaves sit in the meadow area, we don't care.
No.
So, but in terms of a traditional neighborhood, and be honest, the days I work home, it's amazing how many leaf blowers are going off. But so, because it's maintained once, they come in, done, and it's gone. So, but I can't promise
No, I know.
on electric or
That's
non-electric.
Just something I wanted to
I think we're all probably going there. but,
say. Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
All right.
Quick question. After hearing the response from last time, from the audience, have you guys thought about potentially downsizing the project to not have the two crossings and keep it maybe a little less invasive of chopping down trees, clearing land, and making the project smaller overall?
You know, we didn't have those conversations. Our focus was, you know, trying to find a balance and on that. And we believe we achieved the goals by this revision.
Yeah, the McLean needs to grow. It's 55 units. We've got great studies that say that. They're needed in the community, and we did not consider that. We feel that the crossings with all the alternatives and all the improvements that have been had is an appropriate thing for your favorable consideration. But we appreciate the question, but it's not, the company is not interested in trying to take a half step here.
Not for us. For I just had a question about the secondary road. Is that something that's required by the state or the, you know, for fire department?
Fire department.
Fire department.
So, I mean, it's good practice, right? So by coming in, it's a single area. We met with town staff early in the application. It's a traditional thing, so, but it's not curved. It's only 20 feet wide. We actually had it gated, but the fire marshal said, I don't want gates, I want to come right in. And we tried to meander in a way. So the footprint of that is going to be very small. As a secondary option, it'll be a nice walking path for, and what we found was actually in the back of Goodrich, it's an emergency access, but it's highly used as a walking path around. So there's an added benefit there, but we believe it's a strong component. But we were able to kind of wiggle it through, so we didn't have any wetland impacts for that. But even if you remember the villas, we had to punch out to Great Pond. Once again, second means of egress. It's gated at the end there,
Yeah.
but it's traditionally been always Simsbury's fire marshal's direction to get two ways in. Understanding the population here too, they have to get in there.
Any other questions for the commission? All right. Thank you very
Well,
much.
I appreciate it.
Thank you
We'll
for the changes.
be happy to come back up again, but
All right. And now I'd like to open it up to the intervener, or the public, or the,
So the interveners include kind of a collective of 9, it looks like. So if they do have kind of a lead spokesperson, that might be helpful to you to get started.
yeah.
Good evening. Thank you for hearing further public input regarding this plan. My name is Jessica Franks, and I live at 4 Country Club Drive. We are abutters to McLean's proposed development, and I am one of the environmental interveners. In the public hearing on 2/18, many citizens voiced concern regarding the impact this proposed high-density development will have on the wildlife habitat. Today, I have emailed the committee an extensive letter with photos documenting a specific example of such wildlife whose habitat McLean's proposed development will destroy and degrade. As you know, the Inland Wetlands and Watercourses Regulations state in Section 10.2, criteria for decision, the Commission shall take into consideration all relevant facts and circumstances, including the importance of the area to the region with respect to including natural habitat and negative impacts or degradation of habitats. The town of Simsbury asked the following in the application. Number 5, it was describe the related construction activities and their impact on wildlife habitats. Number 6 was describe the long-term or permanent impact of the activities on environmental aspects, such as wildlife habitats on A, wetlands and or watercourses, and B, abutting riparian properties and or wetlands and or watercourses. The McLean application response was Section 5 and Wetlands Impact Report. I have included the entirety of Section 5 in my letter, but will highlight a line here tonight. Primary habitats present on site include meadowland, hardwood forest, pine forest, and palustrine wetlands. There are no natural diversity database or critical habitat areas located on site. These areas will be impacted by the proposed vegetation clearing. However, proposed landscaping will aim to preserve and enhance the landscape resources, including the meadow, wetland, and woodland habitats. This response offers little detail and by remaining vague does not address specific destruction that will occur to the wildlife habitat from this proposed development. Furthermore, the McLean application claims in Table 2 that their function value evaluation of these wetlands show no wetland-dependent wildlife habitat and no endangered species. My letter has presented evidence to the contrary of McLean's claims, with a specific species example, the eastern box turtle. It is the Connecticut species of special concern, and in that letter, you will see documented evidence from the past 8 years that the meadow and forest that they propose to wipe out in this plan is currently this turtle, in those photos, this turtle's thriving habitat. And as you can see, these photos show multiple different turtles. I ask that the committee review the full letter and appendix of photos and consider the profound and irreversible impact this proposed development will have on the eastern box turtle and the myriad of other wildlife that inhabit and travel through this special acreage. Thankfully, the town of Simsbury has provided your committee with specific statutes and mandates that can prevent this type of destruction and degradation from occurring within our town. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you.
Give me 1 second. Good evening. My name is Christopher Pelzar. My wife Leslie and I own 24 Schoolhouse Lane. You can see my house on most of these pictures. We're on one of the sides of the meadows. I'm here today also as a signer of the verified notice of intervention submitted to the town this morning. And I'm here on behalf of a rapidly growing group of Simsbury residents who oppose this development. We'll present a review of the proposed work by McLean as presented to this committee via expert testimony, and essentially I'm here to introduce them. But before I do introduce our experts, I'd like to make a few points, because I've heard an awful lot of things here that give me pause. The people who oppose this development are all residents of Simsbury. All of you on this committee are residents of Simsbury. We are your neighbors and you're ours. You've been elected to this committee to honorably serve the interests of your neighbors and to protect the wetlands and the environment in this town, and we sincerely thank you for your volunteer service. We don't take it lightly. We all love Simsbury, and we have invested in Simsbury because it's a unique and special place. And to that point, next year, I will have been in and around Simsbury for 50 years. My wife, 64 years. Went to Simsbury High School. We both graduated in 1979. Both our sets of parents have lived here, Winterset Lane, Simsbury Manor Drive. Some of them are no longer with us. But Simsbury has always been our home, and we love it, as we assume you do as well. Simsbury is very unique. It's a very special place compared to most of the valley. It's a place with many cases where our children have grown up and are still growing up. It's a place blessed with incredible open spaces, albeit it's dwindling in some areas. This is a place with abundant wildlife. It's a place with beautiful New England-style town center. It's a place with uncrowded country roads. And most importantly, this is a place with amazing people, such as the ones I'm here to present, as well as all of you on this committee. We're all people who care about preserving the place and its uniqueness for generations to come. I'm proud of all my neighbors, and I'm also proud of all of you on this committee. This is not easy. It's a hard job. So all of us are residents of this town who have invested in the properties in this town, who, as I said earlier, we've made the decision to live in this town. We've raised families. All of us have a stake and a responsibility in maintaining its legacy and preservation, a responsibility. I reference this all because, and I don't mean this to detract from any of the discussions that have gone on so far on a scientific nature, but I reference all of this because if you look at the people that are ultimately responsible for this development, I'm struck by a common glaring fact. In fact, it actually shocked me. And again, this is to the best of my knowledge, so if I'm wrong about something, I'll gladly stand corrected. But none of the executive management of McLean Affiliates, Inc. live in Simsbury. Not the current president of McLean, not the VP of Finance of McLean. Not even the former president of McLean, who served for over 22 years, lived in Simsbury. In addition, the management staff employed by the town of Simsbury, some of which are here, according to the town website, have oversight of this committee, amongst others. They also do not reside in Simsbury. Not the town manager, not the director of planning and community development, and not the assistant town planner. Now, obviously, the reason I mention that is that all of these people live in Simsbury. All of you live in Simsbury. Nobody that is proposing this project, other than the Honorable T.J. Donahue as their attorney, lives in Simsbury. As residents of town who oppose this development, as well as all of you on the committee, we've invested our lives here, like I said before. The people that I've mentioned from McLean and the town of Simsbury, I'm sure they're fine people. I'm not being critical about themselves personally. But it doesn't negate the fact that they do not live here. They are not going to live with the repercussions of their decisions. Our joint responsibility is to each other who live here, period, not to our employers. The other thing I'd like to mention, which is little known, because I've heard a lot, and I don't disagree, with the historical benevolence of the McLean organization. However, mid-last year in 2024, Fitch Ratings downgraded the McLean bond, and they referenced the following. Just as for everybody's aware, McLean leveraged the bond issue in the amount of $65 million for the real estate expansion called the Goodrich, which you're all familiar with. That debt is a very large percentage of McLean's overall debt. Therefore, the bond gets rated. The bond was downgraded September of last year, not too long ago, really about 5-6 months ago. The outlook revision to negative reflects the possibility that McLean may violate the first debt service coverage ratio, the DSCR, on the testing date, due to elevated operating expenses. Now, I mention this because we've heard that this development is to the benefit of elderly people that really need homes. And so that McLean can continue to provide the services. Yet, McLean told Fitch that they're incorporating several cost containment initiatives, which include the reduction of assisted living unit, skilled nursing beds. They've restructured the nursing schedule, i.e., not so much overtime, and its dining program. Now, Fitch does believe that these strategies will improve profitability over time, which is kind of ironic considering it's a nonprofit. But the negative outlook reflects execution risk and the possibility of a DSR covenant violation. Now, what a DSR is an acronym for debt service coverage ratio. Doesn't mean the bond will be pulled, but it just means that it won't be worth as much. And most notably and most shockingly, Fitch claims, again, just a few months ago, that McLean has no additional debt capacity at the current rating. Zero. There's lots of ways to raise money. It won't be through the state bonds. Now, I mean this sincerely. I'm not trying to be critical of McLean's significant history. Not at all. I've lived in this town for a long time. I'm well aware of it. But considering that a large majority of its current debt is for real estate expansion, at the same time that they're committing to a reduction in assisted living unit and skilled nursing beds, this current McLean looks more and more like a RIT, which stands for Real Estate Investment Trust, and a real estate developer. It looks more like that than it does his historical mission and clearly its public persona. So we respectfully request that since there are significant issues relating to their plan and its negative impacts on the wetlands and the surrounding neighborhoods, that this committee look at McLean's application in the same manner that any real estate developer would be, with a planned construction of 52 luxury condominium units overlooking a golf course. These units are several $100,000 apiece. This is not low-income housing. McLean should not be given special consideration as to their past, rather be viewed in their current plans moving forward. Now, we've heard that this development is the basis because they want to continue providing care for the elderly. But in reality, if you look at the financials and you look at Fitch's opinion, they need this development to operate because their operating costs are too high. And they're going to negate services in order to get to an operational positive cash flow. The opposition to this development is growing. The group of your Simsbury neighbors is a diverse coalition, which surprises me a lot. We have different backgrounds, different ages, and perhaps different political affiliations. We've got everything under the sun. It is, however, united in opposition, focused and resolute. Tonight, our presence in front of this committee and the work we've done thus far demonstrates we are committed to protecting the Simsbury wetlands and environment from this enormous construction project. If you look at a satellite map, this is a massive construction project compared to the land that they currently have. We're hopeful this committee will join us in opposing this real estate development plan. And to that end, I'd like to introduce some of our experts. I'd like to call up Stephen D. Trinkhouse of Trinkhouse Engineering. He'll be followed by George Logan, Principal Environmental Scientist at REMA Ecological Services. And then we'll have a conclusion summary of Kevin Gregg, who is also a signer of the verified notice of innovation. I want to thank you all very much.
Good evening, members of the commission. My name is Steve Trinkus. I'm a licensed professional engineer from Simsbury. I've been practicing in land development since the early 80s, but my surveying experience actually goes back to 1976. So I've been in the field a very long time. I've been licensed since '88. I've been a sole practitioner since 1990. I'm also an expert in the field of low impact development, where the focus is on runoff volume and water quality. And that's really the basis of my comments tonight. I've submitted a letter, so I'm going to summarize it. I'm not going to go through it. But the bottom line is the stormwater management system proposed by the applicant really consists of what we consider secondary practices, structural solutions to stormwater. We have catch basins with 2-foot sumps, which are standard. We have online hydrodynamic separators. And then we have some type of stormwater basin, which I'll get into a little bit. But catch basins and online separators are considered secondary practices by the old stormwater manual from '04 from DEP because they don't do a great job at removing pollutants. What I've submitted on page 2 is monitoring data from both the University of New Hampshire Stormwater Center, which has been ongoing since 2004, and what's called the ASC BMP database. This is a database put out by the American Society of Civil Engineers and put together by Wright Water engineers out of Denver. And it takes real-world monitoring data from people that have projects. They submit influent, effluent flows, and they put it all in the database. And they give you influent and effluent concentrations, which you can then determine what the percent removals are. And the bottom line is these practices, as proposed by the applicant, do a really poor job of water quality. As an example, a 2-foot sump catch basin will remove 5% of total suspended solids, maybe 7% of hydrocarbons, no metals, no phosphorus, no nitrogen. Online separators by UNH, which separated them from online versus offline, 29% total suspended solids, 42 on the hydrocarbons, 26 metals, 0 phosphorus, 0 nitrogen. And the reason this is important is the 2024 DEP Stormwater Quality Manual, which is now fully in effect, has standards of 90% TSS removal, 60% phosphorus, and 40% nitrogen. Those are the goals all projects must meet. Additionally, all the towns in the state of Connecticut are under the MS4 permit. It's a municipal stormwater permit. It came from EPA, is sent to DEP, and DEP sends it out to all 169 towns. The primary purpose of the MS4 permit is addressing water quality of what we call non-point source runoff, the runoff from our roof, the runoff from our parking lots and driveways. So it's the obligation of land use agencies to approve projects that improve the water quality of the runoff. That's the whole driver of the MS4 permit. In the stormwater report by the applicant, there appear to be claiming these basins are infiltration basins. Two basins are using 1/2 inch per hour infiltration. Another one is using 4.14 inches per hour. These are what's called Rawls rates. These are from 1982. These are national averages of infiltration rates by various soil types. The 24 manual makes it very clear that you can use a Rawls rate for a preliminary assessment of a site, but you must do field infiltration testing if you're going to, do infiltration basins. We don't have any infiltration testing done on this site, so they're not in compliance in that regard. Because the channel protection volume is being claimed, they're meeting, which is reduction of the post-development 2-year storm peak rate to 50% of the pre-development, that's a function of infiltration. If infiltration does not occur, you don't meet the channel protection volume as far as that goes. Another thing, and unfortunately many engineers also, I guess, fall into this particular trap. When we do a watershed analysis under pre-development conditions, we're just using meadow, woods in various conditions. And, it's a class A, B, C, or D soil. However, at least on the submitted plans, there was a substantial amount of grading being done around the area of the proposed development of all the units. When we cut and fill soils, what was a Class A soil is not going to be a Class A soil under the post-development conditions. As you cut and fill the soils, you reduce the porosity, i.e. the space between the soil particles, and they get tighter together, you get less infiltration, which leads to more runoff. Generally, if you have a foot or less, it drops one class, so a Class A soil would go to a Class B. If you have more than a foot, you can drop from an A soil all the way down to a C. And again, so that means your vegetated areas can generate as much runoff as sometimes your paved areas. And they're using the same soil class under post-development conditions as they are under pre-development. So that's an issue. Again, the infiltration testing, was not done in these basins. There were several borings done out here. One of them is missing. There's a test pit 14 shown on the plans, but in the stormwater report and the application documents, I didn't find the results for test pit 14. But as I think this commissioner, Mr. Eaton, mentioned, they all have glacial till. Glacial till is an impermeable soil layer that generally has a perched groundwater table on top of it. And based on the bottom of the basins versus the depth of the glacial till, the bottoms of these basins are going to be between 1/2 foot and 3.5 foot below the glacial till layer. And I will tell you, having dug thousands of test pits in my practice, glacial till doesn't infiltrate water. It sits on top of it. It doesn't infiltrate. Additionally, weathered rock was encountered in one of the test pits. The DEP manual says you have to have a 36-inch separation between rock and the bottom of your basin. We don't have enough testing. I know on the plan there are proposed pits to be done prior to construction. I will submit you need to do those tests now because you need to know as a commission that this stormwater system will function as intended and reduce pollutant loads. And right now, there is not enough data to know that. Unfortunately, in our DEP manual, there is a table 4.2, which basically says if you provide what's called the water quality volume or the retention volume as a storage volume within a practice, it's assumed, and that's the language DEP used, that you'll get these average pollutant removal rates that I cited. I'm going to tell you based on experience in LID since 2000, so 24 years doing LID, that's not how it works. You have to do what's termed a pollutant loading analysis, where you calculate the actual pollutant loads for each watershed going to your basin, and then you apply removal efficiencies, and in series, you have to discount the second and third ones in series, because simply as the water gets cleaner, it gets harder to clean out the remaining pollutants. And that's the only way to determine if you're going to meet these water quality requirements. Simply providing a volume does not equate to treatment. Actually, in the 04 manual, it was clearly stated the water quality volume had to be, quote unquote, captured and treated. It didn't say captured, it said captured and treated. And the way you treat it is really through vegetation, contact of the water with vegetation and soils, and you let the biological, chemical, and physical processes of Mother Nature reduce the pollutant loads. The 24 manual, similar to the 04 manual, is a guidance document. That is the language the DEP uses. It is not a manual per se. It is a guidance document to assist engineers in designing practices to address water quality. But it's up to the professional engineer designing these projects to prove that their systems will work and are designed properly to reduce non-point source pollutant loads. A few comments on the site plans itself. On the existing conditions map, there was a whole bunch of test pits shown on the plan throughout this upland area. Why weren't those results submitted? They'd be invaluable to look at. In the beginning of the site, they're realigning some of the existing driveways or roadways into the site, and they're putting some new drainage in. Why aren't we treating that runoff? We should be trying to improve the quality of the runoff. So if we're realigning roadways, maybe widening them, we should just not connect them to the existing system. We should ensure that we're treating that runoff. The bottom of these stormwater basins are to be seeded with what's known as New England wet mix or wetland seed mix. Well, if these are infiltration basins, wetland plants won't grow there because an infiltration basically is a basin is basically a dry desert. It's in generally very sandy soils, and the grass kind of looks like grass in August all year long. because there's no moisture doesn't sit in it. But if the basin will support wetland seed mix, it's also not going to infiltrate because then you have a seasonal groundwater table within the basin. Detention basin 300, which is the existing basin, I believe, right up here, they're putting a retaining wall across that. Detention basins, as they're dug out, they begin to silt up over time. A question I have is, there's no test pit there. How do we know that the soils in the basin can support the retaining wall? You may have to do a lot more excavation in that basin to get it to work. It's also stated that there's clearing and grading onto the golf course property, which I understand is under, probably an umbrella of the McLean organization. But that's on a separate property. And in my experience in land use is either that property needs to be part of this application or this property needs to get an easement from the other property to cut trees and do grading on it. Even if you own it, it's a separate parcel. And unless there's cross easements, this property doesn't have the legal right to disturb the other property, as far as that goes. On the wetland crossings themselves, we heard Matt talk about, they're using oversized box culverts. But box culverts are four-sided structures. You also have to bed them on generally a foot of crushed stone, so you're digging down, a foot below the bottom of the wetland channel in order to set the box culvert in there. DEP has had a policy for a number of years of, pushing bottomless box culverts or even bridges to span these wetland corridors. I actually had a site in Ridgefield, Connecticut, where we had a intermittent stream that was about this wide, and the wetlands was about this wide. I wanted to put a 15-inch pipe in it. That was the simplest thing to me. One, because it was dead level. The water did not run either direction. There was literally a half-inch of pitch over 10 feet. So the water just sat in the center of this. And that Wetlands Commission required us to put a bottomless culvert in. We did footings outside the wetlands, and we're going to set what's called a C culvert because it doesn't have a bottom on it, on footings, to span it. So we did not touch the wetlands at all. We had this plan as a feasible and prudent alternative to the activities in the upland. But what this doesn't show is the limits of grading associated with this. So the grading may also be somewhat within the upland review. We don't know yet because we only have what I consider a nice, pretty picture. But there's also not alternatives to the actual crossings themselves. You need to look at, if you're having a public hearing, you need to have feasible and prudent alternatives for any activity that has a direct adverse physical impact to a wetland. Clearly, putting a box culvert in a wetland corridor in the narrowest section is a direct physical impact. It's a loss of wetland characteristics. And we don't have alternatives for that. So the applicant needs to provide those as far as that goes. So on several of the stormwater basins, we have a forebay, which is designed to trap sediment. They're only 2 foot deep. The deep manual says 2 to 4. Deeper is better. But what the applicant has is the inlet pipe coming in at the bottom of the basin. Well, the bottom of the forebay is where the sediment's going to trap. So if the invert of the pipe is at the bottom and new water comes in, it stirs up the sediment that's already in there. The reason a deeper forebay is more important is the pipe A comes into the water surface, doesn't come in with the bottom where the sediment has been settling out, and you don't resuspend it. As proposed, the water coming into this basin in subsequent storm events is going to stir up the sediment and push it into the basin, the main section of the basin. Now, if these are infiltration basins, that accumulated, fine sediment, which are silts and clays, only 1/8 to 1/4 inch of that will clog the infiltrative surface of an infiltration practice. We have seen that with bioretention cells. We have seen it with infiltration basins. So it's imperative with infiltration basins that you don't let any dirty water get into it because it can clog it and cause failure of it as far as that goes. So let's see here. We have temporary sediment traps shown on the E&S plans, but there's a table of the volumes need to be provided, but these traps do not provide contours. A contractor cannot build something if he doesn't know what it looks like. You need to have contours so he knows how to build this, and also the design engineer can inspect it to make sure it's built in accordance with plan. We also only have a singular row of siltation fence as a perimeter barrier. This is a large project that they're disturbing. Many parts of the locations with the sill fence, it's perpendicular contours. That's not appropriate because the water will run down the face of the silt fence because it's running downhill. And what it does is it'll erode the soil at the base of the silt fence. And in some cases, if enough water runs down that way, it'll overwhelm the fence when it does become parallel to the contour. We now have a phasing plan, but under the Connecticut DEP general permit, phasing is limited to 5 acres at one time. So if we're talking 16 acres, you're really at 3 to 4 specific phases, and we don't have that yet. We also need to have a detailed construction narrative for every phase as to how each of them are going to get built. Right now, what's on the plan does not meet the requirements of the 2024 E&S guidelines, which were also reviewed by DEP. The bottom line is water quality is not being addressed, and Mr. Logan and his associate will address that. But one of the points that also came up was, I'm going to just go to the map for a second. We have 2 basins, one here, with a wetland corridor here, where previously flow from the upland went to that corridor. Now the discharge points for these 2 basins is below the centralized wetland. So we're going to change the hydrology of that wetland. We're basically taking water that used to go there, and now we're bypassing it around it. So, that's, again, an impact that, George will discuss. But the bottom line is there are going to be increased pollutant loads that go into Hop Brook as a cold water fishery stream. That's a major problem. Another issue that has not come up is thermal impacts. All this impervious cover, when it rains, thermodynamics simply says that rainfall takes the heat off the paved surfaces and runs off. And thermal impacts can adversely affect a cold water fishery stream very, very quickly. Trout have a very narrow range that they can tolerate, and thermal impacts can kill them very quickly as far as that goes. Again, because we do not have infiltration testing, it's likely we will have increased runoff volumes. They'll be discharged to the wetland corridors on this site. It's well documented, goes back to the early 2000s, that increased runoff volumes will cause stream channel morphology changes. And what I mean by that is a stream for a given rainfall amount will flow at a certain depth. But when you have increased volume, the stream is flowing at that nominal depth for a much longer period of time, and it basically doesn't like it. So it starts eroding from the bottom, and then the channel banks cave in. The stream is trying to get wider to get back to what we call a hydrologic equilibrium. But in the meantime, all that eroded material, you're changing a vegetated bank to now an eroded bank, and that eroded material goes downstream, and when it slows down enough, it gets deposited within the channel. So again, these are impacts that we all have to do better on and address them as far as that goes. So I'd be happy to answer any questions, but otherwise I'll turn it over to Mr. Logan at this time.
Thank you.
I have a question. So, I read your note, and there's a lot of technical discussions in here about different pieces. And so I guess the question to you is, do you believe that this project, if it, at least from your perspective, if it was reworked, addressing some of these issues, could you ever get to a point where it would address the issues? The major ones, we haven't really talked a lot about the basins, which are a big part of this. But do you think that you can get to that point at some point?
I believe it's possible, but not in the current configuration.
Okay, but that's a, okay.
Yeah. One additional impact, I think it was mentioned earlier about winter operations. First off, snow stockpiles have to be located on the site where they're going to drain through your stormwater management system. Stockpiled snow basically accumulates all of the pollutants, and then when it melts at this time of year, you get extremely high pollutant loads in the snow melt. So it's imperative that stockpiles are located so that they drain into the stormwater system. De-icing agents, this is, I guess, my really pet peeve. DOT started using the de-icing agents on the state highways, and unfortunately, virtually every town in the state has blindly followed DEP over the cliff. Chloride of the de-icing agent, whether it's sodium chloride, calcium chloride, magnesium chloride, the chloride is the bad part of it. Chloride ions do not go out of the environment. There is no treatment system, lit or conventional, that can remove chloride ions. They stay in the water, they stay in the soil. If you drive up Route 8 from Waterbury up towards Barkhamsted, as the plows push the slush off the roads at 60 miles an hour, the white pines are dying along the road because of chloride impacts. The only way to reduce chloride impacts, quite honestly, is minimize the use. But putting the de-icing agents down preemptively and plowing off the slush is a real problem environmentally. We can trap sand all day long. I think what we really need to do is have everybody go back to driving school and learn how to drive in snow. Because I will tell you, 10 years ago when my son got his license, 3 inches of snow, they canceled driving. I said to one of the instructors, why? You're at a high school with a giant parking lot. Take the kids out, show them how a skid feels like. Oh, it's a liability. That's what I was told. And I said, well, you know what? Giving a 17-year-old a license who has no idea how to drive in snow now becomes my liability. So you know what? I took my son to our high school parking lot in Southbury, and I showed him how a skid works and how to get out of a skid. And he's now out in Wyoming and drives out there in that snow. So, but that's the problem. Sand we can trap, we can get rid of it. The chlorides, we can't do anything. Now, you can use magnesium acetate, which is carbon-based. However, that's 5 times the cost of salt, so no town is going to spend that kind of money. But chlorides are a serious environmental issue, and I believe in 5 or 10 years, many towns, including my town of Southbury, are probably going to have some serious water quality impacts, and it's going to be very hard and very expensive to fix. Dealing with winter operations has to be proactive, and we need to start today to avoid serious impacts on that. Thank you. Yeah.
I have a question about all the houses around there. This proposed development, they're on wells. How are those going to be affected by the runoff?
Well, you know, increased nitrogen loads. Nitrogen comes out in wet environments. It does not come out in dry environments. And again, infiltration basins tend to be dry basins. There's not a lot of transition between, you know, the soil above a bedrock layer, between the, you know, shallow groundwater and the deep bedrock groundwater. But if you're in deep sand and gravel soils, nitrogen that infiltrates, again, can run right down to the bedrock layer and possibly get picked up by the wells. It really depends on having a hydrogeologist investigation of the groundwater movement on the site and whether these wells are down gradient or perhaps up gradient. It all depends on the cracks in the rock, but nitrogen is a concern in stormwater unless you're reducing it before it gets to wells.
So with the glacial till, I live right up the street, and I know about glacial till because that's my whole yard. A very small impact, seemingly nothing, is a huge impact. They built the house next to my parents. I live in the house where I grew up, and it was a field, and they just dug a foundation. And the first rainstorm, there was a river going through our backyard, and it was shocking that it was just the footprint of the foundation. They had to put a berm, but it just diverted into the woods. So in our yard, this is 1975, so no one ever cared. But when the water, this groundwater, it's going to hit that till. It's just going to.
It stays right on top of the
It's
till
just
and
gonna
follows
shoot right down whatever the-
follows the topographic gradient. Yep.
How far down do you have, looking at all the reports, how far down is that? Is it like 20 feet?
The till, well, once we hit a till layer, I've dug test pits. I had a site in Ridgefield years ago. We dug a 25-foot test pit, and we hit glacial till at 3 feet, and it was still there at 25 feet. Generally, it doesn't change. It's like hard pan. Once you're into that layer, it's pretty much all the way down. You know, it's rare that all of a sudden you hit a sand and gravel layer or something like that. But most till that I've dug, it's from wherever you hit it, it goes down 8, 10, 12 feet, the depth of the test pit. It doesn't change.
Do you know how deep the...
Well, the till, according to the...
how far down to get to that till area?
According to the 3 logs that are part of the report, I think one was 2.5 feet below grade, one was 4.5 feet, and maybe the other was 5.5 feet, according to the borings. But like I said, on the existing conditions map submitted by the applicant, there were test pits throughout this whole upland area, but those logs haven't been provided. Those would be really valuable to provide a good assessment of what the soils are on the site. You know, they did borings for these basins. Test pits dug by an excavator are better from an engineering perspective because it allows us as an engineer to see the various soil layers. The borings are a 2-inch hole, you know, so you don't really see the characteristics within that. So observing test pits is a much more valuable assessment of soils, in my professional opinion.
And intrusive.
Well, yeah, but we put the dirt back, we don't leave it out.
Steve, to your point, at the last meeting, there was a gentleman from Washburn, after the Goodrich building was built, still has the same water runoff. In fact, he's provided a video to us of showing water running like a stream down the steps of his house. So that same scenario you just described with your house next to you has occurred as a result of the Goodrich.
Madam Chairman, who's running the meeting? We have so much irrelevant,
I hear you.
so much run on.
Thank you,
It's
Tom.
disconcerting.
Thank you, PJ. We have more, we did provide the applicant with time, and now we're the intervener with time. But it is now 9:15. I was wondering if, we wanted to move to some of the other
Well, if there's no more questions, I'm happy to
But
sit down.
Thank you. Thank you.
Madam Chair, if you don't mind, Mr. Trinkus, just for the record, you, the letter you submitted March 19
Yeah.
is the letter you referenced when you
Yes,
started.
yes,
Perfect.
it
Thank
is.
you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Madam Chair, if I would, George Logan for the record, Remo Ecological Service. I could take a couple of minutes to distribute some reports and get ready for hopefully a brief presentation.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks.
Okay, I think I'm ready for you now. Again, for the record, George Logan, Remo Ecological Services. Just by way of background, I just gave one copy of my resume and my associate, Sigrid Godwa, who's going to also be part of this presentation. And again, what we're going to try to do, oops, thank you. What we're going to try to do is just kind of hit some of the main points because of the passing of the hour. You folks will have some reports. The applicant will have some reports. I'm sure we're going to have a rebuttal and a served rebuttal or whatever needs to happen until we get to agree or disagree on some of the issues. So what my associate and I have done is to kind of look and review and do sort of a quick overview of the plans to see if there were any deficiencies. And then if, just based on what's already in the plan, to see if there were any obvious impacts that would have to be addressed. We did visit the site on 3/6, I think it was. Took a couple of water quality samples. Sorry? The 16th, sorry, did I say the 6th? We also tested the Hop River, Hop Brook, off-site, and we will have that water quality data because we did a full slew, just kind of get an idea of what's going on there. Everyone knows this is a cold water fishery, has in both native trout, brook trout, and brown trout population, and other indicator species that tells us this is quite a good system. So we're able to see some of the wetland flags that were put out there. They look fairly new. But we also found a slew of old flags. Those were the blue flags. So one of the questions that I've come up in my mind is, could we see if there's a difference between the original delineation and the re-verification and get an idea of how this re-verification of the wetland was done? Will we have some wetland flags now? Because we noted a couple of flags that we were able to see that the blue flag was upgrading of the pink flag. Not many, just a few. So we looked at all the information that was put into the application to substantiate the applicant's assertions that this is not going to be an adverse impact to the wetland resources and the surrounding habitats that support the functions and values of the wetlands themselves. We found, honestly, that there is very much a lack of information as far as characterization of the wetland and watercourse resources and the adjacent areas that contribute again to the function and value. For instance, there's no floristic inventory, there's no wildlife inventory. Just in the short time that we were there, we were able to observe certain wildlife. Obviously, we didn't observe the turtles. If we waited another few weeks, month, we probably would. We did see woodcock in wetland number 8, which was interesting because that's an indicator species of wetland quality, and also the mosaic that's there because woodcock use different types of habitat to support their life cycles. So the other thing we did is we looked at adjacent inventories. There were on eBird, some of the hot spots. There's one to the west, there's one to the east. And we noted that there were sightings of brown thrasher, which is a species of special concern, of American kestrel, which is a raptor, a little falcon, also a species of special concern. And looking at the habitat that's there, obviously this is not the right time of the year for me to be doing a wildlife inventory. The habitat for both those species are there. So not only do we certainly have box turtle, but we also potentially have those other raptors and possibly others too. Now, I know what's happened over the years, unfortunately, much to my disappointment, is that we've kind of went from commissions don't regulate wildlife, but they regulate the habitat that supports the wildlife. And we've kind of come too far away. But what I keep saying to people is that, well, if you can do a functions and value analysis and at the end of the day be able to decide whether these functions and values are adversely impacted, you need to know what's utilizing these wetlands, because the more the diversity or maybe the uniqueness of the wildlife species that use these wetlands, obviously the functionality and the sensitivity of those wetlands goes up. One of the things that I noticed in the function and value analysis that was done by my colleagues, very cursory. Usually when we use the descriptive approach, was the highway methodology, which is the common functions and values analysis that we do. We support it with the rationales. There are no rationales that I've seen. Basically, it's a descriptive approach, means that you go through the rationales and kind of go through them. And one of the things that you will notice when you come to the function, which is wildlife habitat and not wetland-dependent wildlife habitat, there's a big difference. So by emphasizing wetland-dependent or wetland-associated, we do a disservice to the actual analysis of that particular function. So that's not what the original function descriptive approach sees. So again, Sigrun can talk a little more about what we saw on Wetland 8, for instance. So what I'd like to do is you have that report in front of you. I think, and instead of me going through verbiage, is to kind of get to some of the high points. And if you would turn with me to the figures, which are pretty instructive, I think, and maybe that will paint the picture and help us to kind of understand some of these high-level points that I'm going to try to make. Figure A shows you the watershed of Hop Brook. It shows you where the subject site is. The little pin that you see there is the Hop Brook at the closest position to the actual property, just basically a few feet away. This is, as has been described, my calculation based on stream stats was almost 3,200 acres. Percent development is only 17.6%, and percent impervious area is only 2.82. That number in itself tells you that you have a high quality brook there. Now, I know that many times what happens when you think of water quality, regardless of whether the system is going to work or not, as Mr. Turncouse, his review doesn't think that it's meeting even the guidelines from the state. What happens is, and then Stream Stats gives you some of that information. At low levels, when the stream is barely moving, it's still a perennial stream in the summertime, and you get a big storm, and if these systems don't work to clean the water properly, that concentration will have a much higher effect because if there's a low flow, there's a lot of dilution happening. So you got to think of that worst case scenario. If you turn the page to the next one, what I did here is I gave you the Connecticut DEP fish community data. It shows you the closest sampling station down gradient, probably 3/4 of a mile or so from the site, and it shows you what they found in 2012. Unfortunately, they haven't done anything more recent close by, but this is from 2012, and you can see that it's truly a brook trout and a brown trout resource. What you also see on this view is where we took the water quality sampling, which was on the Grossman property, right at the edge. Also shows you where we took another sample at the intermittent water course within wetland 8, which was flowing nicely at the time, which we would expect. If you turn the page, and we won't talk about this one because Sigrun will talk about this, and that's from a study that you probably all know from the Onion Mountain Park Forest Management Plan. But the next one is very instructive, and it's the big one that you see right here in front of you. And what I've done is I've taken, this is the revised plan that the applicant has put, where they've kind of tried to stay away from the wetlands to the extent possible. And so what I've done is, all the green is very nice, and we appreciate that. That's definitely a step in the right direction. But what I wanted to show is the impact upon the 100-foot upland review area that still exists, and also, more importantly, the forested habitat that's going to be cleared. And then also I want to show you what's happening with the actual meadow. 45, almost 46% of the meadow is going to be taken out. In my calculation, the meadow is a little over 10 acres. Why is this important? Well, again, what's happening as far as wildlife on this property affects what's happening in the wetland, affects the function of the wetlands as wildlife habitat. Well, we know, for instance, that, well, apart from the woodcock, which was in the middle of wetland 8, which was not surprising at all, good earthworm habitat, they also use the meadow because they need it for, well, they hang out there in the meadow and the grasses during certain times of the year, but they also use these open areas right now for breeding. So But again, what's happening there is that the diminution of wildlife diversity affects the functionality of the wetland itself. And that's not to speak about other potential species that are out there that we don't know about, especially avians, maybe some other things too. And not to, also to mention bats. Most of our bats are listed as threatened or endangered or special concern. And those are a big problem nowadays. So, again, what you see here is basically we could do a whole study on habitat fragmentation right here. This is worst case scenario habitat fragmentation. Everything is being fragmented to the point where I can tell you without a shadow of a doubt that box turtle will be gone. This robust population apparently is there from the pictures I saw. And the fact that this meadow has been there since at least 1934 in its exact configuration. This is a long-standing meadow that's been there. Thankfully, it's been managed nicely, but the fact that it's only been cut in the summertime, maybe August. The portion to the south of the meadow was also open, and that has transitioned into sort of a secondary forest, which has its benefits as far as wildlife. And more to the north, that's forest that has been there for a while, since 1934. I could provide those photographs. I didn't want to overwhelm people tonight. So again, this is unfortunate because based on what you see here in this fragmentation, the function of the wetlands, at least for wildlife habitat, will go down. The next one is pretty instructive, and that's, again, I took from the proposed conditions watersheds that were in the drainage study, and what I did is I superimposed with a red line that you see there from the existing conditions watershed map, the watershed divides, so that I can show you that the big blue area that now feeds wetland 8, and you can see where I had my point, where I started looking at the watersheds with the the red lines come together. I didn't go further down because what I was concerned about, was about that portion of wetland 8, which is above that constriction and above there to the second crossing, possibly a little further up too. But at least that portion is a highly functioning wetland. And I'm telling you that I was very disappointed to see that my colleagues discounted this wetland as being non-diverse, not functioning highly. They didn't even say that there was wildlife habitat that's being offered here. And the diversity of vegetation is much higher there. There's actually very poorly drained soils, tussock sedges, ferns, all kinds of vegetation, starwood ryegrass, violets, you name it. And none of that has been put into the record. So that's definitely a groundwater discharge, recharge area, mostly discharge. And now you're taking all that blue area, all that watershed, and you're taking all that water and you're taking it away from feeding this wetland. And I know that the counter to that as well, but we have infiltration that's happening with that watershed, and it's going to, But as Steve said, a lot of this is going to be shedding more water than it does under existing conditions. So a lot of this water is not going to get into the water to feed this wetland. It's going to completely bypass it, and it's going to change the character of this wetland. And to give you an example of how that's going to happen, if you look at that particular piece of the wetland 8 and look at the far upper gradient one, the characterization of those two portions of the wetland is very different. The upper one is very dry, it's poorly drained. It's not anywhere as diverse as this portion, which is poorly and very poorly drained and has a great diversity of vegetation and hydrologic character. So we're going to drain this wetland out, and Sigrun will tell you when we drain the wetland out, other functions are affected, such as water quality types functions. So the rest of the report is just giving you information on eastern box turtles, not that you don't know about them already, but also on some things that I found on American woodcock. From, again, to me, it's an indicator species of good habitat quality. There's no denying about that. So Sigrun can spend the next maybe 10 minutes giving us a little more information, and then we'll be here for some questions. And I apologize for kind of going through fast, but there's more information if you want to look at it here and ask me questions at the next meeting, because I'm sure we're going to go on.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll start by handing out a conservation brochure for eastern box turtle that I co-wrote with a colleague 25 years ago when I was part of a citizen monitoring program for eastern box turtle. Most of those areas no longer have box turtles. The decline, the disappearance, blinking out of one population after another is gravely concerning. I think I need one for the applicant. Yeah. Okay, my name is Sigrun Gadwa. I'm a wetland scientist, a registered soil scientist. I'm a botanist, do a great deal of vegetation inventories, and my master's is in ecology, and so I'm a botanist, but not a taxonomic botanist as much as an ecological botanist, considering the overall ecosystem, the predators, the food chain, the herptiles as well. And my resume is there. I do have this avocation and experience with the Quinnipiac Watershed Association and the citizen monitoring of wood turtles and box turtles as part of my experience. First, I am the principal of Carrier Ecological Services, so I do some projects on my own as a consultant, but ever since 2000, I've collaborated with REMA Ecological Services on many projects. Sometimes he's a sub-consultant to me, but much more often I am to REMA. Just to clarify that relationship. I'm going to fill in or augment some of the points that George made. First, with regard to the functions and values assessment, I was very surprised to see that all of the human use functions, recreation, aesthetics, and were rated as absent, and that the wildlife habitat function had been changed to be wetland dependent wildlife habitat function, which is not the way the Army Corps methodology is written, and that there was neither a narrative discussion of the rationales for the functions nor the full numbered systematic approach using the published rationales and the methodology, which we do for which REMA uses for its larger projects. In the upper wetlands, wetlands 5 and 7, the striking aspect of them is numerous very large, massive white pines, 3 and 4 feet in diameter. And there also is sprigs of patches of partridge berry and wood reed grass, other wetland plants. But the majesty of those really big trees is certainly warrants presence of aesthetic function. Maybe it's the methodology is supposed to calls for distinguishing between presence of the function and its being a principal function. It may not be a principal function, because but it's certainly present. And the neighbors that we've talked to do walk on trails that go close to and through these wetlands, and there's recreational use by the community members in the surrounding homes. So recreational function is certainly present as well. And as ever, red maple is a dominant species. It's a beautiful color in the fall and in the spring. And to say that recreational and aesthetic values are absent is not intellectually accurate. And the extreme paucity of baseline information, no botanical list whatsoever. And it seems to me that wetland 8 appears to have been characterized in the upper portion where the photographs were taken and where the crossings are, upper and central. But the broad lower portion with the extensive carpets of mosses and lots of tussock sedge, and George mentioned some of the species. It's a really interesting broad and not a degraded wetland by any means. It's with a very wet hydrology and very poorly drained soils, which the changes in the watershed will be dewatering, and that's a serious concern. I should say that wetland functions relate to the processes that take place in wetlands, and be it the settling of sediment in deeper still water, and also very much the processing of biomass through the food chain, through detrivores, and the movement of matter through the food chain, and as it relates to nutrient status. And you need to consider the fauna and flora and the wildlife that's doing the consuming if you're to understand the processes in a wetland and with an appropriate professional functions and values assessment. Now, the main creatures that use all three of the wetlands are actually the insects feeding in the trees, in the bark and the twigs and the pollinators, and especially foliage insects, and the many birds that during migration and also permanent residents that feed on those insects, and also directly on fruits and seeds produced by that. And it needs to be understood that a riparian corridor, the actual delineated wetland, and the upland adjacent to it receives capillary water from the wetland, the adjacent, and that is enriched by nutrients as well, that have weathered from parent materials upslope. So their trees grow faster. They're also more succulent. They're more tender, and preferred by insects. There's more foraging by wildlife in the wetland itself, and of a forested wetland, shrub wetland, and in the adjacent buffer upland review areas as well, because they have the moisture, they have the added nutrients in the soil. Now, I was talking about this from the standpoint of the food chain, but a function which was mentioned as present, toxicants and nutrient processing and uptake, is done by the trees and the vegetation, not only within the actual wetland, but within the adjacent forest. They, with the root systems, take up the water that has dissolved nutrients in it. They transform those nutrients into foliage and twigs. And this happens on a large scale, and we're at 16 acres. there's shallow groundwater that we heard about in the glacier that flows over the hard pan and the glacial till soils is carrying a load of nutrients, and with a portion of the golf course in the watershed, they're whatever soluble materials, soluble fertilizers, but also things like neonics that are highly soluble and very persistent. Other assorted other chemicals do get into the groundwater. You see the lists that are published of the many pesticides that are present in groundwater. So the toxicants are taken up by trees, and they basically are sequestered, and they usually end up, in the twigs and then falling on the ground or in the leaf litter and being sequestered in the soil of the wetland. But they're not flowing in the groundwater and entering as base flow into the lower portion of the far lower portion of the brook, which has got active exchange with Hop Brook and then Hop Brook itself. This is a very significant function of this wooded hillside with its two wetland corridors, is removing both natural nitrogen and phosphorus that's recycled from the trees, and anthropogenic materials as well, and some will be. There was no discussion in the detailed landscaping section of the presentation on what chemicals will be used, and I'm especially worried about what chemicals may be used with residents who are nervous about Lyme disease and ticks, and broad spectrum insecticides are usually used. So the protective function of the existing conditions with forest and meadow is there's a reasonable likelihood that the loading of pollutants and nutrients to the lower end of the system into Hop Brook will increase as a result of this project.
Thank you. Sigrun, do you have much more to?
I have one more thing I want to say. I was very interested to find on the town website the Onion Mountain plan, park management plan, and a figure on it, and it's on page 44, that showed the extensive open space in the vicinity of the Onion Brook, but also the nearby site here and Hop Brook watershed. And in particular, I saw all the small parcels, mostly municipal open space in the newer subdivisions. If you look, it's one of the very first figures. You can see many little light blue markings along the tributaries that feed Hop Brook, and the scale is huge on this thing. A half an inch is 2,600 feet. And so these look like just little slivers along the brooks, but if you measure them out with a scale, and I did that, and I also got on CT Eco and used their open space mapping function, I was really impressed to find out that over the years, the subdivisions in Simsbury, and when you turn the CT Eco onto potential open space, all the property lines show up, so you can tell very easily which are new subdivisions and which aren't. There's been protection of stream corridors, averaging 250 feet, 200 feet, 300 feet. Really extensive protection of stream corridors, even in new subdivisions. along Upper Hop Brook and its tributaries. And there's a precedent, not of doing extensive clear cutting within the upland review area as is currently proposed, but of permanent protection. And you should follow what you've done so far. And I guess it's not surprising, considering that the Rivers Alliance is headquartered in Simsbury, and they've been doing outreach on the significance of wetland buffers for many reasons for several decades. And George and I have been very interested in buffers for a long time, and we did put in the record our white paper, which we keep updating as new literature enters, and which explain a lot of the things I've been talking about, including uptake of toxicants and nutrients from groundwater, not only in the wetlands, but in the adjacent buffers.
Thank you, Sigrid.
Thank you.
I will be mercifully brief. And again, to repeat what Chris said earlier, we do appreciate the difficult decision that's in front of you and appreciate your time and attention. For those of you who don't remember, my name is Kevin Grigg. My wife Deborah and I live at 9 Hop Hollow, along with my 2 children who are in the audience. They came along to support us because they've enjoyed using the meadow for many years, and like us would seek to protect and preserve it. As you know, McLean, by now, as you well know, McLean's proposed development envisions the clear cutting of 16 plus acres of land to construct a 52 unit housing development on recreational green space and animal habitat that has been virtually untouched for 80 years. With all due respect, to allege that this proposal in any way is consistent with Governor McLean's original vision borders on the absurd. His sponsorship of the Migratory Bird Treaty Act and his support for the creation of the McLean Game Refuge, which has already been mentioned, bear clear and unambiguous testimony to his desire to preserve and protect the natural environment while providing care for the elderly. It should be obvious that his intention was not to sacrifice one for the other, as would be the case if this development is approved. The McLean Senior Living Organization is not Simsbury. We, you and I, and our children and our grandchildren are Simsbury. Nor are the financial struggles that we're aware of, that McLean is currently dealing with, nor are those an obligation that the town or its residents should be expected to shoulder at the expense of protecting and preserving the natural environment that Governor McLean so vigorously promoted, and that we, your existing residents, neighbors, and taxpayers rely on as an essential part of our mental, emotional, and physical health and well-being. One cannot truly care for the representatives of any age group or either gender if the natural environment that we are all so inexorably linked to is irreparably and irreversibly damaged. Simply put, there is no amount of mitigation, however seductively described or beautifully rendered, that would ever be able to return this pristine and sensitive natural treasure that we fondly call the meadow to anywhere near its current state. It is for that reason that this precedent set by your decision will profoundly impact the character, attractiveness, and livability of our neighborhoods and potentially our town for generations to come. Our verified notice of intervention goes into considerable detail in support of these allegations, and we certainly have brought our share of technical experts to the table to do the same. Our notice, together with the requirements set forth in the Simsbury Inland Wetlands and Watercourses Regulations and the town's plan of conservation and development, argue unequivocally that McLean's application should be rejected. As our elected and appointed representatives, you must have the courage to place the expressed and generational interests and concerns of current and affected Simsbury residents, your existing residents, neighbors, and taxpayers, above fleeting corporate priorities that in the end amount to little more than short-term financial gain at the expense of the health and well-being of the people, the flora, the fauna, the recreational green space, wetlands, and other natural water features that have defined the character of Simsbury virtually since its inception. You have been granted the authority to do so, and we therefore ask that you quash McLean's application and thereby require them to search for alternatives other than the irreversible degradation of the meadow, which we are quite certain that they can and they will do. Finally, and in the words of Henry David Thoreau, quote, "I should be glad if all the meadows of the earth were left in a wild state, if that were the consequence of men's beginning to redeem themselves." Thank you again for your time and for your attention.
So we're just going to have a little. We've been going for a while. We're going to take a 5-minute recess if anyone needs to use the facilities, and then we will start up again. If there's anyone else who would like to testify or submit comments, if it's if you have something newer to say to add to the conversation, that would be wonderful. We do think we'll be needing to continue the public hearing. So if you feel like you wanted to say it tonight, or if you can come to the next meeting, that would be good. But if someone wants to say anything tonight that hasn't been heard up until this point, this would be the time.
Madam Chair, just if you don't mind, if I just
Thank you.
interrupt, since you have the applicant standing and,
Yes.
and you alluded to extending the public hearing. The public hearing may be extended to April 1st,
All right.
but it does require an extension from the applicant.
Yes. So is the applicant?
He can agree verbally before we get going again.
Thank you.
Madam Chairman, we're happy to extend to the open public hearing to the 1st.
Thank you very much. That will make tonight a little bit shorter, I think. So, all right, good. Does anyone want to make a comment tonight? Any further public? Yes?
I had one question that I'd like to ask through
Yeah.
you, Mrs. Chairman. To the two of the last three witnesses, I would like to know if someone gave them permission to go up on the property, and if so, who did?
And would they like to answer?
I can answer as an abutter that for the 18 years we've lived in Simsbury.
Would you come and identify yourself?
Hi, my name is Veronica Grossman. I live at 17 Hop Hollow. We've lived at that address for about 18 years this spring. For as long as we've lived here, we have been welcome to use the McLean property. We had a longstanding relationship. Our neighborhood has had a longstanding relationship with McLean, with their former president, David Baldonaro. It's our neighborhood who mows the track around the meadow in the long-standing relationship that we've had with McLean. It's our neighbors who erected the bluebird boxes that you'll see that ring the meadow from our long-standing relationship with McLean. We have never been asked to avoid the meadow, to stay off the meadow. We've been invited over decades to walk the meadow, to walk its trails, to help them maintain the meadow. In fact, I had a long conversation with Connor Hogan this past fall about mowing the meadow and was given express permission in writing for our neighborhood to mow the meadow for McLean at our expense. So to say that we are not allowed on their property seems a little hypocritical this evening.
Madam Chairman,
Thank you.
she's indicated that she's been on the property with permission, which I understand, and that may be true. I'd like to know who invited two professionals to go on the property to make professional findings for purposes of opposition in this hearing.
We were invited by the neighbors.
Okay, Madam Chairman, for the record, the interveners had no permission to go on there, and those, without permission, they're on the property and they're trespassers, and that goes to their credibility, right?
Madam Chair, Madam Chair.
The interveners are
everybody.
The interveners are all abutters who are around this meadow who have that same privilege.
Your name for the
Christy Bunn, 15 Hop Hollow.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, this is not going to be your job to adjudicate tonight. Just
No.
accept the comments for the record.
Thank you very much. Yes, thank you. All right.
Real quick, somebody have a Lincoln Navigator, white or silver, in the upper parking lot? I think your windows are open? Or lights are on or something? I just got a text.
Okay. Thank you. All right. Are there any more comments from the public tonight? Anybody? All right. Hearing none, then I'd like to.
So we have secured the library on your next regular scheduled date, which would be April 1, Tuesday, April 1st, 7 p.m. here at the library.
All right.
You can make a motion to continue the public hearing to that date.
Thank you very much. Do we,
I'll move that we continue. I'll move that we continue the public hearing until next meeting.
I'll second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for your comments. Thank you, the applicants, and we'll see you on April 1st. Oh, do we have a motion to adjourn?
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Thank you.
For over 40 years, SCM has been the voice of our town,
bringing us together through local programming,
education, and live broadcasts.
SCM isn't just about television.
It's about empowering our community,
ensuring our voices are heard during government meetings, and celebrating milestones
like our high school graduations.
But today, SCM faces a challenge.
Our funding structure is based on television subscriptions. And it's no secret, people have been cutting the cord.
With a shift to internet-only subscriptions,
SCM receives less revenue,
even though all our programming is freely available online.
We need your support.
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 Your donation can make a difference.
It will ensure that SCM remains open,
continues to educate our youth, and keeps our community informed.
Thanks to SCM, I've been honing my creative skills, helping me work towards my college degree.
SCM is crucial for keeping our community connected.
SCM isn't just here to broadcast local events. They're actually preserving Simsbury's history.
Join us in preserving Simsbury's voice.
Simsbury's voice.
Together we can ensure that SCM continues to thrive
for generations to come.
Visit our website
or scan the QR code on your screen to make your donation.
Every contribution
counts.
Thank you for supporting Simsbury Community Media,
where your town,
your schools,
and your government come together.